Guys, you gotta come see this. Cruz had just popped his head into the cabin where Tiago and I were playing cards. He had a wild look in his eye that Cruz only got when he laid down a winning hand or his horse won big at the track. As we were currently floating in the middle of the ocean on a crab boat, I knew what he had wanted to show us had nothing to do with racehorses. We were at the tail end of peak harvest season. Our last haul had been less than we would have hoped. The three of us debated whether we should head back out for one last stab at a payday or to stay in port. Tiago and I voted to stay. Cruz was the lone holdout. Cruz needed money, but Cruz always needed money, and that wasn't enough to risk the trip. The weather system had reported a late-season hurricane coming right near our port of departure. While Tiago and I saw that as an obvious ill omen, Cruz said that it could be our salvation. His thinking was if we could skirt the hurricane, we would be one of the few boats in the crab-rich waters. No competition. Couple that with it being late in the season and we could fill our hull with all the crabs that our boat could carry. Now that was a bit more persuasive. Never taking yes for an answer, Cruz went on to tell us that he had a dream that our next trip would be extraordinary. Claimed it was as vivid as the real thing. Oh, I could smell the sea, taste it. I saw my mom on the shore waving to me. It's like she was there. He never said why the trip would be extraordinary beyond his dream, but Cruz was a pit bull. Once he had latched on to the leg of an idea, he wasn't dislodged easily. After confirming the storm's track and discussing the logistics of another run, we all agreed to risk it. That said, if things went south, whether due to weather, empty nets, or an act of God, we would return to port. We loaded the sea monk and shoved off. Things instantly went wrong. The monk was ancient and had become persnickety in her old age. Our onboard electronics operated like a mobster at a construction site, there but often not working. Little quality of life things around the ship always needed fixing, pulling our attention away from more pressing matters. We had a wench go out and had to repair it on the fly. A real death by 1,000 paper cut situation. Worse, a day out, we learned the storm's track had changed. Instead of teasing the shoreline before blowing back out into the Atlantic, the storm, Hurricane Maria, shifted and came straight into the Gulf. We had managed to stay a safe distance away, but that didn't stop the water from roiling. Maria had us crashing and bashing all over the decks. I'm not worried, Cruz said while rolling a cigarette. My mom's name is Maria. It's a good omen. Maria's my mom's middle name, I said. He laughed. You see, a double good omen. We're gonna pull out more crabs than a Vegas brothel. He may have been onto something. While Maria's storm bands made the first day of the journey difficult, once we got past them, the waters had calmed. We arrived at our destination unharmed and our nets came out of the water full. It was the best haul that we had had to date. Maybe Cruz's dream had been prophetic after all. What's out there? Tiago, our captain, asked, laying down a card. Another mermaid sighting, I asked, countering Tiago's move. I know what I saw, but no, this is weirder, I mean. I've seen some stuff on the water, but this takes the cake. That was enough to pique our curiosity. Cruz had been a sailor longer than all of us. The man had indeed seen some stuff. Tiago and I put down our hands and headed topside. A strong breeze had started blowing, and as soon as we had set foot on the deck, the temperature dropped a good 10 degrees. I raised my collar around my neck to fight off the cold. I spied something out in the distance. Looked like another ship at first, but something about it seemed wrong, Cruz said, taking us to the railing and pointing toward the horizon. You see it? From where we were, what looked like a shadow was slowly moving along the horizon. It did look like a boat with the naked eye. Did you try hailing it on the radio? I asked. He shook his head. It wouldn't matter because that ain't a boat, he said, handing me a spyglass. I held it up, found the blurry object, and adjusted the focus until something truly unbelievable came into view. Is that a house? And Tiago took the telescope from me and let out a low-pitched whistle. Well, that is something you don't see every day. Sure enough, out in the middle of the ocean was a gray and white, two-story bungalow floating along the surface. The roof had been partially ripped off and there were a lot of shingles missing, but it was otherwise intact. Even the large porch was still attached. It was like God had placed this home out here himself. What the hell? I asked, dumbfounded. Hurricane debris. Maybe it went out with the surge, Cruz said. Homes near the shore get swept out to sea all the time. Yeah, but they don't stay intact. This one's just floating upright like it's supposed to be there, Tiago said. Could you imagine how much it would cost to rent an Airbnb with a 360-degree oceanfront view? Cruz joked. We all chuckled. Overhead, there was a crack of lightning and the distant roll of thunder. I looked over at Tiago, who shrugged. Could be a residual system still lingering. I can't imagine that thing survives another storm, I said. Oh, should we go check it out? Cruz asked. We should call it in and let the proper authorities know about it, Tiago said. Don't see what us going over to it would accomplish. Where's your sense of adventure? It's not like we could board it, I said. It can't be stable enough to walk on. Oh God, no, Tiago said. We would set foot on it and the whole thing would capsize. It would be like when an iceberg rolls over. And worse, the monk would be right next to it. And who knows how this old broad would respond to the water getting jostled like that. Oh please, Cruz said, slapping the pilot room wall. A thunk echoed across the water. This baby's nearly indestructible. A giant squid could attack it and this thing would hold together enough to bring us into port and be ready to go out a week later. Would that be the same giant squid you swore that you saw last year? Tiago said. Bigger even than that. I took the telescope back. There were still planters outside the front windows. As I was trying to figure out the flowers, which looked like ranunculus, I saw a figure move in the window. Oh crap, I said, lowering the scope. There's somebody in there. What? Let me see, Tiago said, grabbing the glass back. Where did you see it? A front window. I saw somebody walk past. I'm gonna grab my binocs, Cruz said as he disappeared below deck. The odds of a house being out here in that condition, no less, are already astronomical, Tiago said, shaking his head. A person inside the house. We'd be more likely to survive being swallowed by a whale. Holy crap, there is somebody in there. I slapped his shoulder in excitement. See, I told you, man. He saw it too, Cruz said, rejoining us. He raised his binoculars. Where did you see them? A second window in the front, near the ranunculus, he said, confirming my flower knowledge. Cruz moved his gaze to the window in question. While fiddling with the focus, he started screaming. Oh God, they're waving at us, look. Tiago raised the telescope again. No kidding. Another crack of thunder made us instinctually hunch. I craned my head and saw storm clouds approaching both the house and our boat. Off in the distance, I could see intense sheets of rain already falling. If that comes through, I said, not needing to say the part that we all knew. We gotta go save them, Cruz said. Maybe we should call in the Coast Guard, Tiago asked. They would never get here in time, I said. Tiago stood there weighing his options. He was the captain, and ultimately it was his call. Cruz and I had been with him on countless runs, so we trusted him with our lives. Whatever he decided, we would follow. Let me call in the Coast Guard, he said. Get their 2 cents on the matter. He moved toward the pilot room when the hair in his head started to rise. In fact, all of our hair did. We all dove into the pilot room as a bolt of lightning came crashing down on the monk. The sound was like a shot from a howitzer, and the boat rocked from the blast. There was an electronic squelch from our instrument panel, followed by a troubling puff of black smoke. All the lights in the cabin went out. After we ensured that Zeus was done, we pulled ourselves off the floor and assessed the damage. When you're part of a 3-person crew, you all get extra responsibilities beyond just crabbing. Cruz dropped down to check on the engine, while Tiago and I needed to check the radio and the navigation equipment. If our electronics were fried, the housefolk wouldn't be the only people stuck out here. No good, Tiago said as he fiddled with the radio. The radio was DOA. After some tooling around with the navigational aids, I got them up and running. The sense of relief I felt in that moment was indescribable. I turned to Tiago with a huge grin on my face. Hey, if Cruz comes back and says that we're good, we can at least find our way back home. I thank the Lord for small miracles, Tiago said, doing the sign of the cross for good measure. I thank him for good engines too, Cruz said, rejoining us. Radio? Out, I said. Dang it, he said. We have to go get those people now, Tiago. I don't want to cause a mutiny or anything, but I agree. With the radio out, the only people on the planet who know that they're out there are the guys in this room. Tiago sighed and nodded. I don't love it, but I can't disagree. I'll bring us over to it. Get on your jackets and get the preservers ready to throw. Aye, aye, Cruz said, disappearing to gear up. As soon as he disappeared, Tiago looked at me. Hey, you can't bring up mutiny, even as a joke. Forgive me, I said. I'm just rattled. Still, it could be dangerous, he said, moving his eyes where Cruz had been. Between you and me, I think he's in a lot of trouble back in port. Money issues, among other things. When you're compromised, you take unnecessary risks. He could start spiraling and screw us all. We're 3 days out from shore. Anything can happen. Sorry, I said. For real. I was just injecting levity in a heavy situation. Hey, I get it, but use your head, okay? When there's doubt, there's no doubt. Get me? I nodded and I headed out of the pilot's room to ready up. Tiago fired up the engines and pointed us towards the floating house. Above us, an angry sky pulsated with lightning and rumbled with thunder. We headed into uncertain waters. I went to the railing and I watched as the house came closer into view. Cruz came over and handed me my life vest. I thanked him and I put it on. He stood next to me, his eyes fixated on the house. You think there's any chance this is a mass delusion? He asked. Hey, anything's possible, I said, motioning to the floating house. I mean, no more proof than what lies ahead. You think there's anything valuable in there? I gave him a look and he smiled. I mean, this technically is a salvage mission now. We're not going inside the house, I said, holding up the light preserver. We toss these and haul them in, same as any crab catch. The silence returned as Tiago cut a path through the choppy waves. The closer we got, the more hurricane damage we saw. The bottom of the house bore the scars of being ripped away from the foundation. Broken boards snapped at craggy angles. The front windows were cracked and what remained looked like a row of jagged teeth. The front door was closed but had taken a beating during the storm. Tiago slowed the engines while we were about 20 yards out. A strong breeze had picked up again, and the monk rolled with the rippling waves. The curtains of rain inched closer. In about 15 minutes or so, we'd be smack dab in the middle of this mess. The monk would be in danger of slamming into that house and potentially screwing all of us. The monk stopped. Tiago joined us at the railing. How in the world is this thing still floating? Maybe something buoyant got trapped underneath, I said, or maybe it's a real-life miracle. It's luck, Cruz said, dumb luck. If we were in a casino, this person would have won big at the machine next to you, just trust me. Tiago cupped his hands around his mouth and hollered, Hello? We all waited for a response, but nobody did. There was a distant flash of lightning and a loud rumble of thunder that vibrated the monk. The curtains of rain were slowly marching toward us. Cruz looked at Tiago. We're not close enough, they can't hear. Oh, they gotta be watching for us, he said. Hello, is anybody there? No response. The monk bobbed in the water. The only sound we heard was waves splashing against the ship. Tiago sighed. I'll bring us in a bit closer. Keep an eye out for any people, huh? Tiago left and Cruz and I scanned the house for anyone. I nodded at the place. I think we might have actually had that mass delusion. There are people in there, maybe they're in danger. I mean, they're obviously in danger, I said, motioning to the floating house. No, like they got hurt and they can't make it to the window. Each time a big wave breaks near this thing, it has to rattle like crazy. How the floor hasn't collapsed is a testament to fine craftsmanship and God. There's probably stuff flying all over with each wave breaking against it. Something could have fallen and knocked them out or cut them, or God knows what. You want to go inside, don't you? I don't want to, he said, but we might need to. Imagine if this were your family, man. You're already panicked about the hurricane making a direct hit, and then you find out that the house is missing. Then you later find out that the house miraculously survived. But the only boat in 100 nautical miles didn't check to see if your family members were alive. That would haunt me my whole life, the not knowing. It was hard to disagree with this point. Staring out at the floating house, I started laughing. I mean, what the hell was I even looking at? Rationally, you know that impossible stuff happens every day. Things that define logic and cause people to have a crisis. But you never imagine anything like that will happen to you. The thought of seeing the seams of reality pull apart feels impossible to experience. But then you find yourself staring at a floating 2-story house in the middle of the ocean from the deck of a crab ship, and suddenly those seams come into focus. It made me think of the stories that old sailors tell about all the unbelievable things they've seen out in the open water. You don't believe them because modern science said that they're just tall tales. Of course, there isn't a giant, shipwrecking squid out there. We would know about it now. Then the corpse of one washes up on a beach, and your whole world is rocked. Looking out at the floating house, I felt a kinship with those old salts who swore they saw mermaids or heard the sweet call of sirens beckoning to them. I couldn't even hazard a guess as to what this was. It was all too fantastical to even comprehend. I was absent-mindedly pinching the skin near my elbow to make sure this wasn't some fever dream. Each squeeze of my fingers confirmed I was alive. This was real. Tiago guided the boat toward the house at a pace that made the turtle look like the hare. I appreciated his caution. Accidentally ramming this thing with the boat would be catastrophic, but the pull of doing the right thing was strong. I found myself tightening my grip on the railing, my knuckles turning white. "Hello?" Cruz yelled. "Is anybody in there?" Silence, save for the water splashing against the boat and the groaning of the house timbers as it swayed in the current. We all huddled near the railing and called out in a different tongue. Cruz tried Spanish. I tried in my broken French. Tiago tried in his rusty Portuguese. Nobody responded. Not at first. I was about to comment on our run of bad luck when the front door to the house swung open. At first, we all thought that it had become dislodged from the waves, but then we saw the shape of a person standing just inside of the foyer. Hey, we're here to save you," Cruz yelled. "Can you walk out onto the porch?" "No," a faint woman's voice called out. I can't." Cruz turned to me. "I wonder if it's too unstable. If she fell through, she'd be trapped under there in the cold water. She would never make it. Is there anybody else in there with you?" Tiago yelled. "Yes, I can't move them. They're hurt." "Okay, hold on," Cruz yelled. "We'll get something over there." Tiago turned to Cruz. "Hey, I can't bring the monk any closer." "We have the raft," Cruz said. "Yeah, but that's our only raft. How are we going to haul it out of the water when you're done rescuing those people? Where are we going to store it on board once it's inflated? We cut it loose and then we head for land. Those people are going to need medical attention that we can't provide, Cruz said. Unless one of you is a doctor and hasn't mentioned it before. Hey, if we leave it behind, we're putting ourselves at risk, especially with these storms brewing. As if he queued it up, another flash of lightning quickly followed by the deep rumble of growing thunder. We can't leave these people out here. This puts all of our lives at risk, theirs and ours. Everything's a risk, Cruz said, his voice louder than intended. We're holding the dice in our hands, we gotta play this out. We can't back away from the table now, not now. I looked at Tiago and shook my head. There are no easy answers here. Tiago turned away from us, angrily ran his hands through his hair and muttered a string of swear words in Portuguese. He came stomping back to us and took in a deep breath. We shouldn't have come out here. I didn't want to, and the voice in my head was screaming to stay in port. Mine too, I said, looking over at Cruz. But we all agreed on this course of action. I think we all need to agree again. This could put all of us at risk. I vote we go, Cruz said. Cut the trip short. We've had a decent haul so far, more than enough to pay for fuel and supplies. Plus the news story about this will absolutely get us more attention from customers. It could be a boom for the business. I appreciated Cruz's dual-pronged attack, business and personal. Solid move. I was already leaning towards the rescue, but it helped to push me over the edge. I nodded. Yeah, I agree. I won't be able to sleep knowing that we didn't try to help. This is a haunt you until you die kind of decision that we're talking about. I don't think I can live with that if we don't try. I looked Tiago in the eyes and shook my head. I'm sorry, but... No, he said, clapping his hand on my shoulder. I can't let this slide either, but we have to hurry, understand? The storm is worsening. We're gonna be screwed like a jar lid if it hits us. We got this, Cappy, Cruz said. In and out, like special forces. Tiago nodded. Get the raft. We can tether a rope between the raft and the monk in case the storm gets worse. Get them on board and get back as fast as you can. Do not go into the house. Who knows how unstable it is. We have maybe 10 minutes or so before the rain catches up and the water's already getting worse. Move. We snapped into action. Cruz broke out the raft and had it in the water while I gathered a few supplies, including my well-worn Leatherman that we would need in the boat. We launched the raft and Tiago threw us the rope. I tied it tight to the gunwale with an expert knot and we began our trek toward the house. As we approached, you could see how the storm had battered the place. The paint had been stripped, the windows were cracked and broken, and chunks of the wall had been knocked out and they were crumbling. The whole home looked so misshapen. I had a hard time believing that it could have survived the washout to sea in one piece. Hello, Cruz yelled. Can you hear me? We waited on pins and needles for a response, but none came. Where the heck is she? Maybe she's washing her hair. I deadpanned. I wanted to loosen up the tension that we were feeling. It didn't work. Ma'am, can you come to the door again? Nothing from inside the house. I swallowed hard. We were within striking distance of the porch steps. Water lapped up onto the wood, forming puddles on the stairs. The wood looked puffy from the swelling and not at all stable. The thought of setting foot on them filled me with anxiety. Another Dracula film-worthy flash of lightning and a burst of thunder shook our raft. The approaching storm was nearly on top of us. The lady inside was going to have to move quickly, or there was a good chance that the entire house would sink below the waves. I nudged Cruz. What is going on? Something's not right, he said. We might have to board it. I knew that this was coming, I think we both did. But speaking it out into the wider world made it real. My whole body shivered. I even felt my soul shimmy. I glanced at the porch. If I leaned out, I could grab the railing and pull us over to disembark. From the upstairs window, we heard a woman scream in horror. Cruz looked at me and I grabbed that railing, pulling us up to the porch. Cruz hurtled over the side of the raft and crashed onto the slick wood. His landing shook the entire porch, and a few boards loosened and fell away, but he stayed dry. "Go," I said. "Be careful." Cruz found his footing, held onto the wall, and opened the front door. With the house cresting over more agitated waves, he disappeared into the darkness. I swallowed hard again. My nerves were shot, and I heard a rattling noise coming from inside of our raft. It was my hand shaking against the side. I glanced back at the monk and saw Tiago standing near the railing. He had tied his end of the rope to the monk's gunwale, making sure that we had a literal lifeline between us. He kept looking up at the sky, keeping track of the storm's movement. The curtain of rain inching closer, the sound of the downpour hitting the ocean getting louder with each minute. Cruz walked past the window with the flowers. His head was on a swivel, his balance unsteady. He did a quick look around the bottom floor but didn't see anybody down there. He popped his head back out the front door. "There isn't anyone on this floor. I'm about to head up. When you get there, come to the window so that I can see you're good." "Sure," he said, ducking back into the floating house. I looked back at Tiago and shrugged. He looked nervous. Even from where I was standing, you could read the concern enveloping his body. He was absent-mindedly tapping the gunwale, transforming his nervous thumping into a beat like some kind of tweaked-out wizard, trying to recreate a Kraftwerk song from memory. The rain was starting to drizzle around the house. The waves beat against it with a little more anger. The increased rolling made me clutch the railing hard to keep steady. Each swell caused the house to shriek and moan. Pieces of lumber from the porch began to pull apart and drift into the open sea. I doubted the porch would be around by the time the brunt of the storm hit us. I put my hands around my mouth and I yelled, "Cruz, what's the holdup?" He didn't respond. My guts tightened. I knew that he had a hard time hearing me from out here, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was in danger. Those old sea stories were rattling around in my mind, literally as the raft rocked with each wave. The sense of impending doom loomed over me like these growing storm clouds. "Cruz, what's going on?" The upstairs window yanked open. Cruz, wild-eyed and grinning, looked like an excited kid on Christmas morning. "You gotta come up here." "What? Why?" "Just come up, trust me." "Where's the woman?" He slammed the window shut. My open jaw let the salty spray from the sea spatter across my tongue. What the hell was Cruz doing? I turned back to Tiago, who was calling out something, but his voice was lost to the wind. He started pointing toward the house. I followed the direction of his finger and saw to my horror the whisper of a water spout beginning to form in the distance. Uh-oh. "Cruz, Cruz, water spout." But his form didn't return to the window. I cursed to myself and shook my head. I was gonna have to go into the house. Reaching out, I clutched the porch railing and pulled the raft up to the edge of the port. The rain had moved from drizzle to droplets, and I heaved myself over the side of the raft. The wood was slippery, and I nearly fell butt over tea kettle into the open ocean. Pausing to ensure my feet were back underneath me, I grabbed the raft and beached it as far as I could onto the wood. I needed to secure the raft to the house. If the stormwater carried it away, Cruz and I would be trapped. We'd be dead. Spying a small length of rope in the raft, I hastily tied a knot from the raft's railing to the porch post. It wasn't my most elegant knot, but it would have to do. I needed to be quick. Water spouts can fizzle out, but they can also grow and wreck stuff. I didn't know which way this one was leaning, but considering our run of luck, I had to assume it would be the latter. I made my way to the front door and I ripped it open. I stepped inside and instantly noticed the rolling of the waves had ceased. I was standing on solid ground. No visible damage from the storm, I could smell somebody roasting something delicious on an oven burner in the kitchen. My stomach rumbled and the aroma brought me back to childhood. My mom in the kitchen humming big band standards, lost in her own world. I heard the humming now, and that's when I noticed that the house was flooded with sunlight. That couldn't be possible. There was a water spout heading toward us. The thunder and the lightning were so severe that I was worried we'd be zapped trying to flee. "My little darling, can you come help me?" It was my mom's voice. Why was I hearing my mom's voice in this house? "Are you hungry? I'm making extra," she said. "Come in here and make a plate." "Absolutely not. I don't care how wonderful the food smelled." I heard thumping upstairs, Cruz. I backed away from the living room and I dashed up the stairs. The second floor seemed completely different from the bottom, like somebody had squished 2 different Lego sets together to create something new. "Cruz!" "In here." I heard him call from one of the rooms at the end of the hall. I opened the door and found him rifling through dresser drawers. On the bed was a small fortune and found cash and jewelry. He ripped open another drawer and just started cackling. He reached in and pulled out handfuls of $100 bills. "Cruz, what are you doing?" "Every drawer is stuffed with valuables, all of them, a freaking bonanza. Who knew this floating house would be such a treasure trove? This is gonna solve all my problems, man. Somebody heard my prayers." "Where's the woman?" "What? Where's the woman, Cruz?" "I don't know, I heard her up here, but when I got here, she was gone. But then I found all this." "Cruz, we've got to find this woman and get out of here. There's a water spout out there. We're out of time." "I gotta... Hold on," he said, grabbing a pillow and stripping off the case. He slid all of his ill-gotten gains inside and slung them over his shoulder like a cat burglar ready to run from the cops. "Okay, we good?" "Was there a woman cooking downstairs when you walked in?" "What are you talking about?" I heard my mom cooking in the kitchen." He froze. "Did you see her?" "No. She asked me to come help her, but I wasn't going in there. Why?" "I heard my mom upstairs, that's why I came up here. She was crying about my dad." "Did you see her?" "Yeah," he said. "I smelled the perfume she used to wear. I hated it. It's burned into my brain. She walked into this room and I followed her. She's not here though." "No, but she must have been because when I walked in, that top drawer was open. I saw the gold and I kinda lost all my senses." He said, the realization of everything hitting him at once. What the hell was my mom doing here? From behind us, we heard a long, drawn-out squeak from somebody trying to walk up the stairs slowly so as to not be noticed. At first, my mind went to Tiago, but that wouldn't make any sense. Who would be on the monk if he were here? How would he even get here? "Hello?" came the woman's voice from the stairs. "Are you two here for me?" I looked at Cruz and whispered, "Where has she been?" Another footstep on the stairs, a slow, methodical. Dread seeped into my body like salt water into lumber. I knew in my soul that she wasn't coming up to talk. She was stalking us. I shared my thoughts with Cruz, who dismissed them. "No way," he said, though I saw the doubt creep into his features. "That wouldn't make sense." "None of this makes sense," I said, struggling to keep my voice low. "Then what are you saying?" I paused. I had a lot to say, but the words were trapped in my mind's parking lot, honking and struggling to find their way out. A louder step on the stairs helped get the thoughts moving in the right direction. "I think the house is haunted." The house that got swept out to sea just happened to be haunted. What are the odds of that? I don't think this house got swept out to sea at all. I think this is a haunted spot in the ocean, and whatever lives here is manifesting a house, I said. And I think that lady isn't really a lady. Cruz was about to respond, but 2 loud thuds from the hallway silenced us. The lady had reached the top of the stairs. "Are you two going to help me, or am I going to have to tell your mothers that you're being bad boys?" On the word boys, the timid female voice deepened and it was filled with menace. Cruz, who had been doubting me, suddenly met me at my premise. "What are we gonna do?" "I think we gotta get out of here now." "How? She's blocking the stairs." I looked back at the window in the room. From here, it still looked sunny outside. With more force than was necessary, I yanked hard and I pulled the window open. The top half of the glass was still glowing with the images of a sunny day outside. The bottom half of the window exposed the truth. The storm had arrived. A hard, steady rain fell and the waves were beating against the house and splintering the base. Cruz looked dumbfounded. "What is this place?" "Oh, you're not thinking of leaving without helping me, are you?" the woman said, her timid voice returning. "I'll die out here all alone." A new noise emerged from the hallway. The sound of suction cups sticking and unsticking on the walls. "I'd rather both of you die with me," she said, her voice giving way to a horrible cackle. "We gotta jump to the porch," I said. "Scramble onto the raft and get the heck back to the monk, and forget this place exists." "Where are you boys hiding now?" the woman asked. We heard the wet slap of a heavy arm land on the door across from us. "Are you in this room?" We listened to the sound of metal hinges snapping and the splintering of wood as she ripped the door across from us off the wall. "Screw this," Cruz said, pushing me aside and punching out the screen. He leaned out the top of the window. His body lashed with rain and dropped the pillowcase down onto the creaking porch. It landed with a thud. "I'll see you down there," he said as he gauged his leap, mumbled a prayer to God, and then jumped. I pushed my head out the window and saw his body collapse onto the porch below. His impact had jarred a couple of boards loose and they disappeared into the raging waters. Cruz collected himself, grabbed his bag of loot, and waved at me to jump. "Oh, that means you boys must be hiding in this room," the woman said, cackling. I heard the wet slap of that heavy arm hit the door. Seconds later, the woman wrenched it away as easily as somebody cracking open a peanut. I caught sight of a pair of jet-black tentacles landing hard on the ground, followed by the sound of a heavy body being dragged behind them. She'd be in the room in seconds, and I had no desire to see her face. Seeing the arms was enough motivation to jump from the window. The fall was sudden and endless at the same time. The world moved in slow motion as my body crashed down. The falling rain stung my eyes, but I could still see the swirling of the water spout as it churned toward us. The lightning and thunder were so loud that it felt like they were in my brain. But something more threatening than the storm boomed over everything: the lady's cackle. I landed on my chest on the porch and I lost my breath. As I hit, the section of the porch broke away and my legs plunged into the icy water below. I scrambled to grab the railing and pull myself back up, but my hand couldn't grip the rain-slicked wood. I slipped into the water. The shock of the cold sapped all my energy. My body had used all its internal resources trying to keep me warm, but it was a fool's gambit. If I didn't get out, I'd be dead in minutes. Thankfully, I had been wise enough to keep my vest on. My head was under for only a second because the life jacket kept me from disappearing below the inky black water. Cruz rushed over, grabbing the railing with one hand and extended the other to me. With all my remaining energy, I clutched his hand and held firm. I kicked and he yanked, and eventually, I breached the water and slid onto the porch. We didn't have time to celebrate. The window above us shattered, bringing bits of broken glass down with the raindrops. The woman's cackling laughter boomed louder than the storm. I stood on uneasy legs. The water was rocking the house like an earthquake, and I nodded at the raft. "We gotta go," I yelled, rushing onto the raft. My legs caught the railing and I tumbled in, smashing my face on the bottom. I could taste the coppery blood in my mouth, but I pushed through. I stood and yelled for Cruz to come on. Above us, the woman beat her tentacles against the walls of the house. Each blow made the whole thing shake. Pieces dislodged and fell into the water. When you coupled that with the rolling waves and pounding rain, it was only a matter of time before the house collapsed. Cruz hefted his bag of goodies up and threw it into the boat with me. As it flew through the air, the pillowcase transformed before our eyes into an anchor with razor-sharp edges. There was no gold, no cash, just revenge for the hubris that Cruz had shown. As the anchor slammed into the raft, it tore a hole in the bottom as easily as a hot knife through butter. A spout of water shot up, soaking me with a salty spray. Seconds later, I could feel the water around my ankles. The raft was sinking. Panic struck my heart, but my brain kicked into gear. I patted my pockets and felt the Leatherman that I kept on me. I yanked it out and started sawing away at the rope that connected the two vessels. Cruz and I could use it to get back to the monk. It wasn't an ideal plan, but ideal plans were a luxury. Now it was time for survival. I yelled at Cruz to get moving. He was still dazed from his wealth, his problem-solving wealth dropping to the ocean floor. I screamed at him again, my hands quickly sawing away at the rope as I did. The 6th or 7th time that I said it, he snapped back to reality and leapt for the boat. He never made it. As I successfully sawed through the last fiber, I turned back to see a dark black tentacle shoot down from the upstairs window and wrap around Cruz's foot. He screamed and punched away at the thick, pulsating arm, but he failed to shake it loose. The tentacle gripped harder, the suction cups holding firm and oozing out a rancid black bile that ate away at his clothes and made his skin burn and bubble. We locked eyes. Fear, regret, and anger shone through his baby blues. I wanted to help, but before I could act, another tentacle shot out and wrapped around his face. His screams were muffled, but the hurt bled through. With a tug, his body took flight toward the open window, toward the cackling sea beast waiting just beyond my view. The water was to my knees, and in a few seconds it would overtake the side and go under, taking me with it. I wrapped the rope around my arm and I jumped into the water. I swam as fast as I could away from the sinking raft, halfway to the sea monk. I heard a tremendous crash behind me and a massive wave overtook me. The house had collapsed. I breached the surface and kept kicking. My body burned and ached, my vision was blurry. I felt a deep hurt in my soul, but I kept moving. I could hear Tiago screaming. I was close to the side of the boat. I might just get out of this alive. I glanced back and watched as the waterspout hit the remains of the house, sending bits of it flinging through the air. Dozens of tiny splashes erupted around me. Small bits of the haunted house pinged off the side of the monk, creating a discordant funeral dirge as I finally mercifully reached the boat. Tiago and I worked in concert to pull me up out of the water. Our reunion was brief. We had to go or we would likely be joining Cruz. As soon as I was on deck, Tiago sprinted for the pilot's room, his feet sliding on the wet floors, and he fired the engines back up. The sea monk roared to life, and we tore away from the storm and the creature as fast as the old girl could go. Though the waves rocked us and the sailing was anything but smooth, Tiago guided us away from hell. 30 minutes later, we had put enough distance between us for Tiago to slow and check on me. I was a mess. Blood-stained teeth from the cuts in my mouth, vomit down the front of my soaked clothes, my body violently shaking from the cold. It didn't matter. Tiago and I hugged and held on to one another, tears streaming down our faces. We had survived. "What the hell was that?" Tiago finally asked. "I don't know. Whatever it was, we should have left it alone. Sorry we didn't listen to you, Captain." He shook his head. "Hey, we're not blaming anyone for anything. We made the right call to try to help someone. I would do that 10 times out of 10. What happened was something that we would have never seen coming. It was an act of God. That wasn't an act of God. That was the act of something God fears." Tiago didn't argue. We're heading back to port now. Neither of us knew Cruz's family or how to reach them. We're debating going to the police, but we're not sure what that would do other than make us suspects in a murder. We've discussed reporting things to the Coast Guard or government, but we haven't made any decisions yet. I'm sitting in my bunk trying to figure out why things happened the way they did. Why Cruz and not me? I've got it narrowed down to 2 thoughts. The first was when my mom called for me to join her in the kitchen, but I didn't go. I never saw her face. Cruz went to his mom. He saw her face. It marked him. The second, Cruz tried to steal something from the creature. He gave in to his basic instincts and it cost him. The man was always a gambler, and this time he should have folded his hand. I don't blame him for trying to cheat the system. Who amongst us wouldn't take the shortcut? But you never know who's watching. What's the expression again? The house always wins. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. You know, especially in February, it can feel like everywhere that you look, people seem to have their love lives completely figured out. Couples posting perfect photos, engagement announcements, big romantic gestures, and meanwhile, you're sitting there wondering if you're behind somehow. But the truth is, most of us are still figuring it out. Whether you're married, dating, single, or just focused on yourself right now, you're right on time. Therapy can really help you sort through that. It can help you understand what you want, what feels heavy, and what might be weighing down your relationships. Sometimes we carry things around without even realizing it, and having someone help you unpack that can make a real difference. BetterHelp makes it easier to get started. They match you with a licensed therapist based on your needs and preferences, and if the match isn't right, you can switch anytime. With over 30,000 therapists and millions of people helped worldwide, they build a platform that really works. So if you've been feeling pressure, uncertainty, or just want more clarity, this could be a good step forward. Sign up and get 10% off at betterhelp.com/MrCreeps. That's betterhelp.com/MrCreeps. So, what exactly is this place called again? Theo looked around the passenger seat to shoot me a slightly annoyed gaze as the SUV drove up the empty 2-lane road, jostling slightly as the truck hit a pothole. Dude, exactly how wasted were you last night? I told you the beach and the park have virtually the same name. Birch Point Beach in Birch Point Beach State Park. Duh. I snorted back at my friend, smirking and flipping him the bird before returning to gently massaging my temples. For a few more moments, the world tilted slightly. Then it seemed to pass, allowing me to let out a small sigh of relief. I'm originally from New England, having been born in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. When I had graduated high school, I had decided that I didn't want to spend my entire life living in the same area that I had been born in. And so, setting my wings, I set out to find a place that I could carve out as my own. Eventually, I settled across the country in eastern Washington and started my own construction business. I made good money and I also made plenty of new friends, but I couldn't help but miss home at times. I would go back during the holidays to spend them with my mother, but aside from that, I never really went back. Until I got a phone call from my old pal, Theo. Dude, you have seriously got to take a break from work and come stay with me in Vaughn for a week at his parents' old summer home in Owl's Head. In any other situation, especially with clients breathing down me and my employees' necks, I would have declined. But the call came just after my girlfriend had told me that she was splitting from me. So, wanting some time to unwind and get away from it, along with life in general, I left my assistant in charge and boarded a plane for Maine the very next day. And now here I was, crumpled in the backseat of the 1986 Jeep Grand Wagoneer that Vaughn had inherited from his parents, heading for some place that I had never heard of before. The throbbing feeling returned, and I let out a soft groan before putting my head in my hands. You're 34 years old, Evan, and you just spent last night getting wasted to the gills at a rager like you're still in your early 20s. And to top it off, you're running on just like 5 hours of sleep. That, if you look it up in the dictionary, is the textbook definition of the word stupid. Something hard gently bumped into the top of my head, and I looked up to see Theo holding out a bottle of Powerade. I took it gratefully, uncapping it and taking a swig. You look like crap warmed over, you know that, right? He asked, finally letting loose with a smile of his own. The cold drink felt amazing going down my throat, driving away some of the dehydration that I felt and fueling my retort. Well, then I look just like I feel. Although with the bags under your eyes, you won't need to make much of a Halloween costume this year to take your little sister trick-or-treating. Vaughn suddenly let out a loud bark of laughter from the driver's seat, causing both of us to jump slightly. Ouch, dude, you just got burned as something spectacular, Theo. He looked away from the road long enough to shoot a grin at him. You're gonna need some aloe vera for that one. Theo rolled his eyes at the lame joke, but it caught me off guard enough that I began snickering. He was about to say something when Vaughn interrupted him. Hey, we're here. I pulled myself up slightly from the leather seat to stare out the windshield. He was right. Ahead of us lay a medium-sized parking area that stretched out in a rectangle. I noted with a slight interest that there were only 1 or 2 other cars here. As if sensing my gaze, Vaughn spoke again. Not many people come here this early in the morning. They're down in town having breakfast or they're still sleeping. I let out a grunt in reply as he pulled into an empty space and parked. For a few moments, the three of us simply sat in the truck, listening to the call of birds filtering in through the closed windows as the sky became lighter, hinting that dawn was just about to break. Then Theo spoke up. Well, let's hit it, gentlemen. And with that, he unbuckled his seatbelt, pushed open the door, and hopped out, slamming it shut behind him. I let out another soft groan as the sound reverberated in my head, making my ears begin to ring like I had a bad case of tinnitus. Vaughn looked around at me, a small look of concern on his face. Sure you're okay, Evan? I took a deep breath, blinking my eyes a few times before answering. Yeah, I think so, just drank a little bit too much last night. My head feels like I just got off the old tilt-a-whirl at Kenobi Lake Park. He let out a soft chuckle. Well, you kinda went a bit overboard last night, bro. His face turned back from amused to concerned. I tell you what, when we get to the beach, you can crash on the towel for a bit. Sound copacetic. I nodded, feeling thankful that out of the 2 of my friends, Vaughn was the one who always had looked after us. He had since we had been kids. He reached over and patted me on the shoulder. Hey, come on before Theo gets impatient and pissy. And together we pushed open our respective doors and stepped out. The cool breeze felt like a godsend against my brow, and I inhaled deeply, smiling at the ocean breeze which invaded my nostrils. Ah, the smell of the ocean. It invigorated me a bit, and I strode around to the back of the Jeep, where Vaughn was lowering the tailgate to retrieve the bag of towels and water that he had tossed in earlier. After shutting the tailgate again and letting the rear window roll back up, he pulled the key out and motioned for us to follow him. For a few minutes we walked in peaceful silence, the only sounds heard being the birds in the trees around us and the growing crash of waves against the shore. Then the trees parted, allowing us our first glimpse of the place that we had been brought to. Theo let out an awestruck laugh. Holy crap, V, you've been holding out on us. The beach looked nothing less than something that you would find in the front of a postcard, which you would send back home to make people jealous of your trip. It stretched out to either side of us in a sort of crescent moon shape, the rocky ground giving way to sand that led to the water's edge. Vast swaths of pine and fir trees encircled the entire beach, looking very much like sentries guarding a hoard of treasure. and the smell of pine needles intermingled with the ocean spray. Seagulls cried from overhead, and I turned my gaze to look out to sea. The sun was just beginning to rise on the horizon, and the dark shapes of what I realized were the Muscle Ridge Islands were framed in its glow. I let out a soft laugh of my own. Dude, this is fantastic. How the heck isn't this place more known? Vaughn began walking towards the sand, the two of us following along. It's always managed to fly just under the radar of most tourists. He called over his shoulder to me. They prefer going to the huge beaches down in York, and that means this place stays a small slice of paradise for the locals, like me. He dropped the tote bag on the sand, reaching in and pulling out 2 bottles of water, which he handed to us as another grin began to spread across his face. And for the next hour or two, we have the entire place to ourselves. Theo let out a whoop at the news, one which made me wince slightly as it echoed in my head, but I couldn't help but give a grin of my own. Regardless of how you feel, this place is dope. A sudden burst of movement caused me to swing my head around, just in time to see Theo begin sprinting for the water. "The last one in's a plucked turkey," he shouted, pulling off his shirt and throwing it behind him. Vaughn shook his head and turned, giving me a slightly amused smile. I let out a snort of my own. Every fish and crab in the bay is gonna think that he's absolutely Jim Dandy when he hits the water and stirs up the bottom. I muttered, causing him to chuckle. "Yeah, you ain't joking, man." I took another swig of water before dropping the bottle on the sand. Crossing my arms over my head, I began to wrestle my shirt off. "Dude, I told you when we got here that you could crash on the towel for a little bit," I heard him say. I finally freed myself from the shirt, casting it to the sand next to the bottle. If I don't at least take a dip in along with you guys, I'll never hear the end of it from him. I hooked a thumb at the figure, which was now beginning to splash around in the shallow water like he was a little kid again. I'll humor him with a few minutes of swimming, and then hop out and lay on the towel for a bit. Besides, swimming in the ocean's always helped clear my head. He looked like he wanted to argue again, being the older brother type, but instead nodded before pulling his shirt off as well. "I race you to the water then?" he asked me, and I nodded. A second later, the two of us took off. The cool wind whipped in my ears and I vaguely heard Theo egging us on. But my gaze was focused on the shoreline, pouring all the power that I could muster into my legs as I awkwardly ran in the sand. My head began to spin again and I silently prayed that I wouldn't suddenly pass out and fall on my face. This is so freaking stupid, but there's no turning back now. And then I reached the water's edge. Even in the middle of summer, the Atlantic Ocean felt absolutely breathtaking in how chilly it was. "Holy crap, it's cold!" I involuntarily yelled out, but I kept going, running until the water reached my knees where I launched myself forward. The cold water felt shocking as it completely enveloped me, and I couldn't help but shudder as my body slid through the water, my eyes pulled tightly shut to prevent the seawater from stinging them. My head breached the surface and I sputtered out as I heard a disappointed cry. "Dang it, Evan. Even hungover, you can still kick my butt." I pushed the hair out of my eyes and turned back to find Vaughn standing in the waist-deep water grinning at me. "I guess I still got it," was all that I said. Theo slapped me on the back congratulating me, and then he turned and began swimming around, laughing as he would dive underwater and surface a few moments later. I shook my head as my feet touched the bottom and I stood up. Another wave of the hangover hit me hard and I closed my eyes for a moment to center myself. It was a bit hard to do with the water gently rising and falling around me in rhythm with the pounding in my head. "You alright, man?" I opened my eyes to see Vaughn gazing at me, even more concerned than he had been before. At this time, I didn't blame him. This truly was a stupid idea. I swallowed before answering. "I think so. I'm just gonna go wait around for a few minutes and then pop out on the towel and lay down for a bit." My friend nodded, and then gestured to the pair of legs now sticking out of the water. And go on, I'll keep an eye on this numbskull to make sure that he doesn't hurt himself. Nodding, I turned away and waded towards the left side of the beach, making sure to keep the point of my vision so I wouldn't accidentally wade out too far. The waves gently slapped my body, and as I drew further away from the hooting and hollering behind me, I began to feel a little bit better. Being in nature had always worked as a sort of natural healing salve for me, and this was no exception. I gazed down into the water, looking at the shimmering world that my legs walked through. A rather annoyed crab scuttled out of my way as I approached, raising its claws as if challenging me to a duel. I chuckled softly. Not today, buddy, I'm nowhere near in the mood. A few small fish darted about just ahead of me, before streaking between my legs and out into deeper water. The distant crash of the waves on the rocky shoreline further out completed the idyllic, peaceful scene, and I felt my pounding head lessen slightly. That was when the feeling came over me. To this very day, I can't fully describe what it was. All I know is one moment I was feeling content. The next, it was like a lightning bolt had gone up my spine. The shiver that coursed through me was stronger and more noticeable than I had ever had before in my life, and it caused me to freeze in place. My head snapped up and I looked around me. Aside from the gently lapping waves, nothing disturbed the water around me. I shot a gaze behind me. Vaughn and Theo were still at the other end of the beach, now engaged in some sort of diving competition. Neither one was paying attention to me. Then what the heck was that? I wondered. Another feeling washed over me, this time much easier to distinguish, though far less welcome. It was the feeling of being watched, being stared at. Having had to dodge more than a few sketchy people every time that I had to travel to Seattle for meetings with clients, it was a feeling that I knew all too well. I had learned how to distinguish the difference between a pair of benevolent eyes watching me and those with, well, shall we say, more malicious intentions in mind. This feeling was firmly in the latter category. My gaze suddenly swept up towards the tree line. I remembered seeing the two other cars in the parking lot, and my mind began to conjure up the image of someone standing just inside the tree line, watching us like a scene from a horror movie. But nobody stood staring at us. Not that I could see anyways. But still, the feeling persisted, almost seeming to grow in intensity a little. I gave my head a shake. Get a grip, dude. Nobody's watching you. Nobody else is here. Wanting to take my mind off of it, I instead turned and looked ahead of me down into the water. The light-colored sand and pebbles stretched away for another 15 or 20 feet, and then the bottom changed to a slightly darker color, looking a little bit covered with muck and seaweed, indicating the slope which led out to deeper water. For a moment, I simply stared at it, my head slightly tilting to the side. Something was scratching at the back of my mind very faintly, but I couldn't understand what it was. Why does that look weird to me? Nausea suddenly slammed into me and the dizziness returned with a vengeance. I felt bile rise in my throat and I turned away from the spot, rushing to get out of the water. Emerging onto the beach, I raced up towards the trees, hearing Vaughn vaguely call my name, but I was focused on one thing only. I reached the first tree and I leaned against it, taking a single breath before vomiting onto the ground. For a minute, I just leaned against the tree and threw up. The pounding in my head sprang up and I fought for breath against the sting of my stomach acid in my mouth and throat. The world began to spin and I thought that I would faint where I stood. Dude, holy crap. I turned, seeing Theo and Vaughn standing next to me. Vaughn pulled me away from the tree and gently began guiding me back towards the tote bag. Come on, man, you need to lie down, he said. Reaching our stuff, he signaled for Theo to lay out one of the towels, and then slowly eased me down to sit on it. He picked up my shirt from the sand, shaking it off and handing it to me. Put this on and try to relax, he said. before looking up at Theo. He ain't going back in the water, bro. Last night really did a number on him. I heard Theo let out a slightly disappointed sigh. Sure, whatever. He used to be able to hold his drink a lot better than this man. Well, that's because I gave up the party life and grew up unlike you. I thought, but I kept my mouth shut. Pulling my shirt over my head, I laid down on the towel so that I could look out at the dark water. Vaughn spoke again, slightly annoyed by our friend's tone. Look, he needs to rest. You can go back in the water if you want, but keep an eye on him. Where the heck are you going? Theo asked. I'm gonna go take a quick hike up on the trails to cool off, especially after that little quip you made about our friend. I began to close my eyes. Sleep was calling my name, and she was insistent about it this time. I heard Vaughn walk away, muttering to himself. Theo appeared in the narrow band of my vision. He looked down at me, a slightly guilty expression on his face, and then he leaned down and patted my shoulder. I feel better, bro, he said softly. I grunted in reply as he turned to run back to the water. As I stared at the ocean, the feeling that I had had while waiting had returned to me, this time dulled by the encroaching sleep. For a moment, I realized that it almost felt like something had told me not to keep moving forward. But a new feeling poked its head out, one that I couldn't place, but it was just as quickly chased away. I heard Theo splashing, signaling that he had re-entered the water. My eyes closed. For a small time, I lay in a sort of half-awake, half-asleep state, listening to the sounds of the gulls overhead and the splashing of my friend in the water. The rising sun felt warm against my wet skin. There was suddenly a single splash louder than the others, almost pulling me back to the waking world. And then it was quiet and peaceful. A small smile crossed my face. The next thing I knew, I was being shaken awake. For a few moments, I attempted to resist, as I had been in the middle of a very pleasant dream. But the shaking remained insistent, and I gradually became aware of a voice calling my name. Evan, wake up, man, please. I let out a grunt, signaling that I was awake as I rolled over onto my back. The voice came again. Come on, buddy, you need to wake up. I finally cracked my eyes open, jarring them shut against the blinding sun. I'm awake, I muttered, pulling myself into a sitting position. My head still throbbed, though not as much as it had before. Something was placed into my hand, and after a moment of feeling, I realized it was a pair of sunglasses. Flipping them open and sliding them on, I was finally able to open my eyes. Vaughn stood above me, looking around in almost a frantic motion. When he looked down at me, I snapped fully awake, as I caught sight of the expression adorning his face. He looked beyond worried. Dude, what is it? I asked. Did you happen to see Theo leave the beach, or hear him say anything about going anywhere? His question made me rise to my feet on slightly shaky legs. I looked around. The beach, aside from the two of us, was completely deserted. Nobody played in the water and nobody moved in the woods behind us. The heck? No, I finally answered. No, I didn't. The last thing that I remember was him running back to the water after you took off. I heard him splashing around and then I fell asleep. Great, Vaughn muttered and then gestured down. Well, he couldn't have gone that far. He left his shirt and shoes here. He was right. Theo's Converses and t-shirt still lay where he had dropped them. My mind began to turn faster and faster. I looked at my friend. Could he have gone back to the Jeep for something? A look of relief suddenly flashed in his eyes. Come on, let's go quickly look. And with that, he led the way back up the trail, walking slowly so that I could keep up. The dizziness hadn't fully gone away, but at least I felt confident that I wouldn't pass out now. I felt sure that we would round the corner and see our friend rifling through the truck for something. We did leave our phones in the Jeep anyways. But as we rounded the last bend and the parking lot came into view, that hope was torn from me like a fish in a shark's mouth. The Jeep sat silently where we had parked it. The door is still locked. Crap, Vaughn hissed as he stopped for a moment. A rustling sound suddenly came from the direction of one of the trailheads and we looked up, half expecting to see him, but instead a stranger walked out of the woods in hiking attire. He cast us a look as he walked to his car and got in, starting the engine and driving away. Vaughn cursed again. Come on, we need to get back to the beach and try to find him. I agreed and the two of us half walked, half ran back to the beach. The slight annoyance that I had had towards Theo when I had woken up had now been replaced by a slight worry. The guy can be a complete jack at times and he can also be a bit self-centered, but he's still my friend. We burst back out into the sunlight and looked around the empty beach. Nothing had changed since we left. Let's check the woods around the edge and the oceanside trails and then we come back here, I said, offering a plan. He nodded and then looked at me. You get to check the right side on your own for a few minutes. I nodded and he patted my shoulder before taking off towards the left side of the beach. Turning towards the right, I did the same. For what my waterproof watch told me was 10 minutes, but felt more like an eternity. I walked through the trees and along the trails, calling out Theo's name. I could hear Vaughn doing the same. The faint sound of his call drifted across the mouth of the bay. Finally, I made my way to the beach, the worry intensifying from finding no sign of him. God, I hope he didn't do something monumentally dumb and hurt himself. Vaughn met me by the towels. I shook my head as he raised his hands to me. He let out a loud sigh as I stood next to him. I didn't find him either, he simply said, and then began rubbing the back of his neck, a trademark sign that he was beginning to stress out. Tell me again the last thing you remember seeing of him, he asked me, and I took a deep breath and spoke. Like I said, man, I remember him leaning over me after you had gone. He leaned down and told me to feel better, and then I heard him run back to the water. I heard him splashing around for a minute, and then I heard a loud splash, and then I trailed off as something began to connect in my mind. The jigsaw pieces came together quickly, and I felt a shiver shoot up my spine as the realization hit me. My heart began to beat hard in my chest, and I felt the blood begin to drain out of my face as a wave of dread surged into me. Oh crap. Vaughn had caught sight of my face and he grabbed my shoulder to steady me. What, Evan? Then what? My eyes locked with his. I heard a loud splash and then nothing. Silence. My friend's face suddenly went as pale as mine must have looked as he realized what I was saying, and both of our gazes swung towards the water. The waves lapped gently on the shore and no sign of movement came from it. He finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Oh God. And then the two of us began running for the water, shouting Theo's name. Neither one of us bothered to pull off our shirts. We hit the water hard. I nearly tripped as a particularly large swell that smacked me in the knees, and I swung my gaze around seeing nothing. The mental image of my friend's drowned body hovering just above the sandy bottom flashed in my mind's eye for a moment, and I pushed it away as another wave of fear rolled into me. You gotta keep calm, man, you gotta stay calm. A hand fell on my shoulder and I turned, snapping myself out of my thoughts to see Vaughn beside me, his face now set in steely determination. We've gotta split up and search. He pointed to the farthest right side of the bay. You take that side and keep calling out to me every so often, whether you find him or not, and I'll do the same over here. I nodded, forcing myself to stay as calm as possible as I watched him turn away, lifting his arms out of the water as he began heading towards the other side. I gazed after him for another moment and then turned and began moving in the opposite direction. My eyes, aided by the sunglasses that I still had on, stared down into the water, rapidly looking to the left and to the right, but I saw nothing but sand and rocks. You find anything? I heard Vaughn call out behind me. Nothing yet. My eyes flickered towards the darker shade of the deeper water. He could have easily been pulled out to the sea by the tide. After all, you have no idea if there's a riptide in the bay. That thought scared me more than anything. I could easily imagine Theo's corpse drifting in the dark, like the body in the underwater scene from the TV show The Terror. I was beginning to chide myself again when I felt my foot collide with something that half rose out of the bottom, kicking up a large cloud of silt and sand. I could tell by the feeling of it against my foot that it wasn't anything natural. My breath quickened a bit and I forced myself to stoop down, my hand disappearing into the cloud as I felt around it. My chin was touching the water and I shot my eyes around as I felt my fingers close around it. The same odd feeling that I had had earlier returned. I still couldn't tell what it was, but with every fiber of my being on alert, it felt amplified and thoroughly unpleasant. I stood back up, pulling what I had uncovered out of the water. A small wave of confusion passed over me as I stared, watching the water drain out of it. What the heck? It was a man's shoe. One of these slip-on types that you would see people wearing while aboard yachts. It clearly had been sitting on the bottom for a long time. A slimy covering of muck and algae stuck to the top and the color had begun fading. My gaze looked down into the water to see if its twin lay on the bottom. There was nothing else there. Why didn't the person retrieve their shoe if they lost it? I shook my head suddenly. I needed to focus. Theo's life might depend on it. If he's even still alive. Vaughn called out again. "Hey, what'd you find?" I turned to see him looking back at me. Nothing of his, just an old shoe. Keep looking. He nodded at me and turned back. I turned, giving the shoe a last look before letting it slip back below the waves. I watched it sink to the bottom and then I moved forward again. I had only gone another 15 feet when I heard a loud splash come from somewhere behind me, and then nothing. I called out, "Hey, did you find him?" No answer. "Hey Vaughn, did you find anything?" Still nothing. Another shiver suddenly rolled up my spine and I turned, beginning to call out again. "Dude, did you find—" Vaughn was gone. For a moment, my brain short-circuited, trying to process what I was seeing. "What the—" I whispered, and my brain suddenly computed, and I realized that he must have dived underwater for something. A heavy pit settled in my stomach as I realized that he might have found our friend, and I prepared myself to see him surface carrying Theo's body. But nobody broke the gently rolling swells. I looked at my watch, seeing that a minute had passed since he had disappeared. "Vaughn?" I called out. My voice seemed to echo off the trees and the bay itself, but nobody answered me. I called out again, "Vaughn?" And then I suddenly felt my heart begin to race again as a new wave of fear had surged into me. What happened to him? I began to move towards the left, keeping in line with where I had last seen him. The largest swell yet smacked into me and I waited as fast as I could go. I suddenly imagined that there was a sharp drop-off, and that both of my friends had accidentally fallen into it, getting caught in a riptide which pulled them out to sea into the bottom. My heart was pounding like a drum in my chest and I was close to hyperventilating. Finally, I reached where I swore he had been and I looked around. I was standing in water up to my chest and even with the shirt on, I was beginning to shiver. Nothing moved and I saw no sign of my friend anywhere. And that was when something caught my eye beneath the waves. I turned, trying to distinguish what it was, but the swells had become a bit fiercer, distorting everything. I took a step forward, squinting my eyes. It remained elusively out of focus, though I could tell that it did not belong, looking much brighter than the surrounding sand. Another step forwards and it became a little clearer, though still unrecognizable. Another large swell smacked into me, and I took a third step forwards. That's when the same feeling that I had had earlier slammed into me like a Kenworth. The same lightning bolt shot up my spine and I froze. I realized that I had reached the same place that I had had it before as well. As much as I tried forcing myself to move forwards, it was as if some primitive part of my brain refused to allow my body to do so. Finally, I decided to quickly duck under the water to see what I had spotted. Leaving the sunglasses on, I took a deep breath and slipped beneath the waves. The salt water stung my eyes as I forced them open, the shapes distorted, but much easier to see than from above. I turned to look in the direction that I had, seeing it much clearer now. What was that? I allowed myself to float a little closer. The object came into focus. I froze like a statue. For a moment, I wasn't able to move, my eyes locking onto it, my brain trying to comprehend what it was, and simultaneously trying to refuse. The feeling that I had felt again returned with a vengeance, along with a new emotion: horror. I shot up, my head breaking the water as I sputtered it from my mouth and felt my heart thunder in my chest. My eyes widened as I slowly began to back away, locking on to what I recognized now. It was a human leg. And to be more specific, it was Vaughn's leg. The tattoo wrapped around the ankle was proof of that. It lay on the bottom, and from what I saw, it ended by the upper thigh. My eyes flashed around, looking frantically at the water around me. Fear like I had never felt before crashed into me in bigger and bigger waves. A shark. There's a shark in here, and it just killed both my friends. The thought spurred me to take another step backwards. As I did, the thought occurred to me to look for any pools of blood. The last thing that I wanted to do was accidentally step into one. I looked back at the leg, my eyes following up the calf to the knee to the leg moved. I froze again. What? For a moment I stared, wondering if it was an involuntary twitch. But then the leg began to thrash, kicking out hard almost frantically. There was no way that it would be able to do that unless it was still attached to the body. My eyes again moved up the leg towards the thigh, and I suddenly felt as if the wind had been knocked out of me. Vaughn's leg disappeared into the mucky bottom of the bay. As I stared, something began to take shape, something that my eyes had not caught before, and I felt a new wave of horror and dread hit me as I realized what I was seeing. A line in the muck, one that seemed about 3 or 4 feet across, one that I realized had teeth poking out from either side of it. Sharp, translucent, needle-like teeth. That wasn't the thing that made me want to scream though. 2 eyes stared out at me from just above it, ones that almost perfectly blended in with the bottom, if not for the black pupils that gazed coldly up at me. The line, the mouth opened slightly, and I felt a bit of suction almost pulling me off my feet. I watched, petrified, as Vaughn's leg, which for a split second I saw was still attached to him, was sucked inside. The foot giving one final pathetic kick as the mouth closed over it. It was a sight that, all these months later, I still see in my nightmares. My body shook violently and every fiber of my being screamed at me to get out of the water. But I was literally rooted to the spot, frozen in terror. I felt like the character in a horror movie, the kind that you screamed at to move as the killer advanced on them and never moved. Something to my right caught my eye, a small movement. I turned, and for a moment I didn't understand what I was seeing. And then I was suddenly racing towards the beach, the water maddeningly slowing me. I felt a suction pull on my legs and a loud splash emanate from behind me, but I forced myself to fight it. The water became shallow, and as soon as it reached my knees, I began running. A strange sound suddenly reached my ears, and for a moment, my mind couldn't comprehend what it was, and then I realized. Screams. My screams. It's been almost 6 months since I tore from the water that morning. As soon as I was free of the waves, I sprinted for the parking lot, stopping only to snatch up the keys to Vaughn's Jeep. I had been delirious as I had crashed through the bushes. According to the hiker who had found me frantically trying to unlock the driver's door, that I had barely been able to speak. But when I babbled about my friends and the water, he called the cops. When they had come, I had calmed down just enough to be able to tell them what had happened. They, of course, didn't believe me. They thought that I had had a mental break. They searched the beach and even bring in a diver in to check the bay, but they found nothing. No sign of Vaughn or Theo, and no monster buried in the sand and muck. Only depressions, which the diver noted looked a bit unnatural. The police chalked my friends' fates up to either drowning or a shark attack. For such a small town, it surprisingly didn't even make the local paper. And when Theo's girlfriend arrived when the police had called her, they barely answered any of her questions. She was forced to go through the most basic procedures before being hurried out the door. And since Vaughn's parents had died 3 years ago, there was nobody that they could call for him. I can only assume that the people in charge of government in Owl's Head didn't want the idea of 2 people dying at their secluded paradise-like beach to stain the town's reputation. As for me, as soon as I was released, I flew straight back to Washington. I tried to get back to as normal a life as possible, but it's been impossible. When I need to report to my clients in Seattle, I now video call them instead of traveling there myself. I tried one time, but as soon as my eyes spied the massive ocean stretching out away from it, I began to shake so badly that I had to pull over. I can't stand to even see the ocean anymore. Heck, I can't even stand to be near a lake, now without being reduced to a screaming, blubbering mess. I know what it was. Growing up, I'd always gone to the Boston Aquarium during summer vacation with my mother. I had wanted to be a marine biologist for a time, and I begged her to take me to see all the creatures that I used to adore. And I remember staring into one particular tank, watching a monstrous-looking fish bury itself into the sand, waiting for prey to swim by so that it could leap up and grab them, before swallowing them whole. One that was only about 3 feet long, 5 times smaller than the horror that I saw that day. And looking to the plaque mounted on the wall beside the glass, seeing the name, Stargazer. I suffer nightmares every single time I fall asleep. Nightmares of seeing my friend being eaten alive, disappearing into that mouth one as wide as a dinner table. Nightmares of seeing those cold eyes gazing at me, eyeing me like a Thanksgiving turkey. And nightmares of turning to see the second one rising from the bottom, getting ready to strike at me. The few people that I tried to tell about what I saw that day, scientists and marine biologists, never believed me, saying that those fish could never grow to such sizes. And now I finally decided to post what happened that day here, in a place others tell of unbelievable and terrific things that nobody believes. I don't care if nobody believes me here either. I need to warn you. Warn as many people as I can. There are horrific things that prowl the ocean. Things that scientists haven't seen yet. Things that nobody has seen yet. Seen and lived to tell about anyways. Even if you don't believe me, please at least be wary when you go to the beach. Be vigilant when you wade into the water to have fun with your friends or family. Because it's not just the deep ocean that you should be afraid of. Today's episode is also sponsored by Rocket Money. You know, for the longest time I felt overwhelmed trying to keep track of my money. Between subscriptions, random charges, and bills, it always felt like something was slipping through the cracks. I'd open my banking app and think, wait, what was that charge? And that's why I started using Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. What I really like is how it puts everything in one place. It tracks my subscriptions, shows me where my money is actually going, and even lets me cancel ones that I don't want to use anymore with just a few taps. It saved me time and helped me stop paying for stuff that I forgot about. It also automatically categorizes my transactions so that I can see my spending patterns, set budgets, and work toward real goals. Whether I'm saving for something big or just trying to be more mindful, having that clear picture makes a huge difference. If you've ever felt like managing your finances is way more stressful than it should be, Rocket Money can really help. Let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/Mr. Creeps. That's rocketmoney.com/Mr. Creeps. rocketmoney.com/Mr. Creeps. You want to hear about the weirdest thing I ever seen in the ocean? Harvey, the old salt who lived at Neptune's Net, asked me one night, "Buy me a sip of Cuddy Sark and I'll tell you something only a handful of people have ever heard, and all of them are dead," he said, jabbing his finger for emphasis. His gravelly voice gave the ancient mariner a gravitas you wouldn't expect from a drunk at the end of the bar. "I've heard your stories before, Harv," I said, taking a sip of my beer. "No thanks." "Oh, you heard me lie to tourists, sure," he said, leaning forward on his stool. "But after the news I got today, well, I want to tell someone the truth for once." "What happened today?" the curious bartender asked as she cleaned a mug. "Oh, don't feel the need to bring down the room. Just know that it ain't going away," he said, cradling his bottle of Bud. "I want to get this story off my soul before Davy Jones comes a-callin'." Harv was approaching 65, though he looked 10 years older. Years of working on the water and bending his elbow at beer halls had taken a toll on him. His hair and beard were all salt, no pepper. His green eyes had dulled with age. His pupils bore the telltale milky white growth of cataracts. The well-worn wrinkles of his bronzed face made him look like Jimmy Fox's mitt. His most dominating feature, though, was the ridgeline of white scar tissue that ran from his jaw to his forehead on the left side of his face. I had heard him tell people all kinds of stories, and got it from a knife fight with an orangutan. Pirates in the Red Sea tortured him for fun. A sea demon jumped on deck and sliced him with a sharpened shell. The man told more whoppers than Burger King sold. Despite knowing all this, there was a sincerity in his eyes that I had never seen before. Granted, I wasn't at the bar all the time, but a glance at the bartender let me know that she was experiencing the same thing. She knew Harv, had heard all of his bullshit stories, but she had never seen the man this raw before. "A Cuddy Sark for Harv," I told her, but she had already poured the drink and handed it over. "Much obliged," he said, tipping his cap to me before taking a sip of the scotch. "Oh, love that burn, even after all these years." "What's on your mind?" I asked. He took another sip, letting his thoughts gather steam before he finally spoke. 30 years ago, I worked on a salvage ship called the Bottom Feeder. We ran out of San Diego, but our work took us all over the West Coast. We were a small crew, but we'd worked together for years. A well-oiled team. I loved the guys like they were family," he said, his voice breaking some. He took a sip of the Sark and recovered. "Some rich muckety-muck hired us to do a dive, but didn't want his name on the paperwork. Happened a lot in those Wild West days. The industry wasn't regulated like it is now." The bartender and I settled in for this epic. This is what he told us. "There were 4 of us on the Bottom Feeder. Me, Paul, Will, and Cappy. Paul and I were the youngest, and both still in our 20s. He was my drinking pal and wingman most nights. When we got paid, we went into port, and good lord, the times we'd have. Cappy, who would have been around my age, would call us a Tweedledee and Tweedledum, but he meant nothing by it. He thought of us as his grandkids. Will was the lead diver and the dad of the group. He was strict but firm. Knew his shit too. Been diving since he took his first steps. If I hadn't met his parents, I would swear that he was Poseidon's kid. just understood the water and its many lurking dangers better than anyone alive. Anyway, the rich guy wanted us to retrieve some cargo that he had lost when his yacht sank off the coast of Baja California, and told the coasties and insurance that it had gone down in a storm. He was lucky to get away alive. That was the official story anyway. Truth was, the older rich man had married a pretty young wife, and as those relationships go, it broke up quicker than a wooden hull against a rocky shoal. The man, I think his name was Mort or Marty. Son's cooked my memory some. Anyway, the man confided in Cappy that his soon-to-be ex was a vindictive, money-obsessed gal that wanted to take him to the cleaners. To circumvent that, he concocted a plan to put his valuables in watertight barrels and sink them on his boat. I figured the ex wouldn't go looking for them if they were at the bottom of the Pacific. She'd happily take the insurance money and move on with the rest of her life. In case you don't know the score, kid, that's insurance fraud. Claim the things as lost, recover them in secret, and sell them on the black market. It's why the man wanted his name off the paperwork. You can judge us for being shady, and we were, but when they pay in cash up front, you put your morals on the back burner. Landlords don't take virtue as payment. Besides, the salvage world is smaller and more gossip-ridden than a sewing circle. You burn a client, they trash your name, and the work dries up. We weren't about to do that. And Cappy told the man we'd have no problem retrieving his things from the briny depths. Said the only complication would be the weather, but the outlook in the following week looked smooth, so we didn't anticipate any issues. The man told us that if we got his things to him by the week's end, he'd double the rate. Kid, let me tell ya, the best lubricant in the world ain't KY. It's cash on the table. We left that evening. As we neared the dive spot, Paul and I pulled out a bottle of cheap brandy and took turns passing it back and forth. We both hated the taste of it, but it had become a pre-dive tradition, for reasons that we had long forgotten. Will was in the room with us, but instead of imbibing, he was double-checking and triple-checking our gear. What the hell is so valuable you sink a yacht to hide it? Paul asked, taking a nip. I took the bottle from him and drank a drop or 2 or 12. Maybe he killed someone and wanted to hide the body. There's easier ways to hide a body, Will said. I tried handing him the bottle, but he passed. How do you drink that shit before a dive? Puts hair on your chest, I said, cackling. Wife likes me bald, thanks, Will said. Cappy, what about you? Brandy fan. The man entered and lit a smoke. Aye, but not my favorite. More of an in-a-pinch booze, if you ask me. Mind your intake, boys, the waves might get choppy. Can't have you heaving up your breakfast on the deck. What are we bringing up? Paul asked, putting his cap on the bottle and stowing it. Aye, glad you asked, Cappy said, waving us into the pilot room. We followed him like ducklings behind their mother. Laid out on the table in front of us were the blueprints for the yacht that we were heading toward. Cappy pointed at the map. And gentlemen, this is the Allegro, 3-deck pleasure ship that measures 45 meters from toes to nose. 3 decks, sun, main, and lower. Our target is here, he said, pointing at a spacious location on the lower deck. The ballroom. Kinda small for a ballroom, no? I asked. Cappy shrugged. More of an entertaining space, I suppose. Anyway, the man has 4 waterproof barrels stuffed to the gills with his things. Said he'd like all 4, but it's important we get the container marked as Summer Song. What the hell is Summer Song? Paul asked. It contains a very rare violin. A violin? He sank his boat for a fiddle, Paul retorted. No, he sunk it for a Stradivarius, Will said. There are about 600 of these left in the world. That thing is worth millions, tens of millions, depending on the condition. Way more than his boat. Well, that's why I only play a harmonica, Paul said, pulling it out of his pocket and giving us a quick trip up the scales. I have dozens of them, and you can get them for a few bucks anywhere in the world. And yet you never think to buy a tune, Cappy said with a wink. And we all laughed. And Paul quickly blew out an off-key opening to Camptown Races and nodded. And doo-dah, sir. And now that the concert is over, let's talk logistics. And so we did. It was pretty straightforward. Will and I would be the team to head down into the ballroom. Paul would clear the path from the stairwell to the steel cables. All three of us would help attach the barrels, and Cappy would pull them up to the bottom feeder. If there are any complications, we surface and discuss. We don't go cowboy and try to solve the problem under the waves. When oxygen is limited, discussions happen topside. I won't haul out bodies because of someone's pride. Will said, eyeing Paul. Paul blew a cheerful note on his harmonica. I'm not running point on this. I'm golden. No worries for me. You said that the last time, Will said, just reminding everyone before we get into the water. I'm hearing ya, and I'm good. Promise, Paul said. Same, I agreed. I'll keep him in line if I have to. Boys, if anything happens, we can't call the coasties. And this is an unsanctioned salvage mission. The men paid for privacy. If something bad happens, we're on our own. We get caught out here and that's the end of the company. End of our livelihoods, you understand. We did. I can hear the wheels in your head spinning. That's a dumb thing to do, Harv, and it was. But we did it all the time and had never had a bump in the road. Plus, when you're in your 20s, you believe you're invincible. And young bucks don't concern themselves with shotguns until the hunters show up. A day later, we found ourselves at the coordinates, outside the rack on the peninsula's northern side. The seafloor depth in this area is all over the place because of plate tectonics. Some trenches can run 3,000 meters, while others are as shallow as 30. Our man had put down his boat near the more shallow areas, but that didn't mean it stayed there. We wouldn't know until we got into the drink. Jesus, we're looking at 50 meters, Paul said as we geared up. And that's deeper than most religions. Maybe we should say a prayer to Poseidon then. Up our odds some, I countered. Before I could respond, Will joined us. He looked at us both and shook his head. You boys ready for this one? Isn't gonna be a walk in the park. Why'd he put it so deep? Will shrugged. That kind of man who thinks sinking a multi-million-dollar violin in the water is already not making sound decisions. Who knows what he was thinking when he thought up this crazy scheme? And did he really think investigators would come out to the rack looking for the stuff? Maybe. They can be pit bulls if your story sounds suspicious. Plus, they probably do a ton of business with them. Take a loss on this yacht to secure the protection on the next. I nodded because there wasn't any more to add. Will was right. Will was often right. While Cappy was the North Star, Will was the sectant that we used to read the skies. I would have followed that man into hell in a gasoline suit if he told me we'd get through to the other side. After we geared up and went topside, we checked our oxygen tanks one last time. They were golden. Cappy was waiting for us in his usual spot, leaning against the gunwale having his traditional pre-dive cigarette. The white smoke curled over his head and was hard to see against the violently blue sky. You boys good to go? He asked, licking his fingers and snuffing at his smoke. We gave him a thumbs up. He nodded. And be safe, be calm, be swift, he said, giving us the sign of the cross as he blessed us with his own Holy Trinity. We all nodded back at him, muttered an amen to ourselves, and plunged into the water. The distance we were going was about the limit of recreational scuba dives, but few divers ever go this deep. The farther you get into the blue, the colder and darker it becomes. Around 100 meters, it's impossible to see anything without lights. And we weren't going that deep, but we took lights anyway because diving into the bowels of a sunken ship is equivalent to being in a cave. Without any light, you're as good as dead. Lack of light is one of the many dangers that lurk in the deep. When you're nearly 6 atmospheres down and something catastrophic happens, it's curtains for ya. Best case, your corpse washes up on a beach and the crabs eat you. Your story becomes a cautionary tale to new divers about the dangers of carelessness. Worst case, you're lost to the waves, and no one on shore knows or cares what happened to you. As we dove, the familiar buildup of pressure in my ears and sinuses emerged. I popped them and got immediate relief. The next pressure change that hits your body, and a thing you can't just pop away, is the compression around your lungs. A hug that never ends. We were about 20 meters down when the deeper cold seeped through my suit. Like your lungs, you're aware of the chill, but there isn't anything that you can do. You don't even have to go down far before it's noticeable. Imagine walking into a restaurant's freezer, and you get the idea. While all these issues are concerns at the forefront of your mind, the worst thing that can happen to you is nitrogen narcosis. If you've ever been drunk and tried to order food on the phone, you know what feeling narked is like. Confusion, euphoria, sleepiness, and if you hang in the danger zone long enough, death. If you're narking, you need to get to safer depths as soon as humanly possible. Our job is to ignore these concerns and focus on the task at hand. They never leave your brain, but if you can compartmentalize them, it helps. I've seen beginners flip out underwater and it never ends well. If getting the bends is the best result, I'd wager you can figure out the worst. At about 45 meters, Will pointed down. Like a waving mirage in the desert, the Allegro came into view. It had landed right side up, its bow nestled against a few rocks. Looks like it had just followed the anchor all the way down and settled as if God himself had placed it there. It wasn't hard not to see the divine in the Allegro's landing. About 10 feet from where the ship settled, you could see the jagged black line of a trench. It wasn't bottomless, but from where I was floating, I couldn't see the bottom. Another 10 feet and this thing would have been impossible to find without a submersible. The rich stay lucky. The boat was beautiful, even in the inky depths with schools of silverfish darting through it. White with blue trim and a sun deck made for day drinking and bad decisions with loose women. Random electric cables rose from its body like a sea anemone's stinging arms. As we approached, I prayed we were clownfish, immune to its dangerous touch. I looked over at Will, who nodded at the wreck and gave us a thumbs down. He wasn't judging the boat though. In the water, hand signals are among the few ways to relay messages between divers. Thumbs down meant to go lower, in this case into the boat. Thumbs up not surprisingly meant to rise. An OK sign means what you think it does, but a shaking OK sign implies something's wrong. The worst signal is a slash across the throat. It means you're out of air. The most prominent noise when you're underwater is your breathing. It's a good thing too. The steady rhythm of life. It reminds you to stay calm. You're a foreigner in this hostile world. Man may have conquered the land, but our dominion ends at the shore. It's healthy to keep that dynamic in your brain. We swam over the sun deck, looking for the stairwell that led into the bowels of the ship. There were still some chairs on the deck, but the currents had moved most of them, and they littered the seabed. If you stayed and looked down toward the engines, you'd occasionally see a black drop of oil seep out, its rainbow surface shimmering in the low light. The stairwell came into view, and Will and Paul flipped on their handheld spotlights. The sudden burst of light sent the fish darting away. If they had the capability of thought beyond get food, It's hard not to imagine they'd see us the same way people talk about UFO abductions. Will reached the stairs first, shining his light into the abyss. It's haunting in the spotlight. A gauzy photo reel but with globs of disbelief smeared across the lens. If the area around the sun deck was like dusk, everything on the main deck and lower was midnight. Black hole dark. We followed the beam of light down the narrow stairs. The wreckage shifted some of the furniture. The stairs remained mostly clear, but even a small obstruction can become a significant problem. When Will and I would go into the ballroom, it would be Paul's job to clear the path. We let him get to work and moved on. As we hit the landing for the main deck, something odd echoed off the surrounding walls. Music. There shouldn't be any noise down here, yet the muted sounds of someone playing a violin found our ears. It couldn't be a radio. Historically, water and electronics are bitter enemies, but our ears told us a different story. Someone or something down on the lower decks was playing a classical violin piece. I'm sure the fish loved it. Will gave me a thumbs down. I nodded and we started our descent down the stairs. With each step we glided past, the music grew louder. I'm not a fan of the genre, but it was a pretty tune. Somber, which made sense. We were trapped in a wreck, 6 stories deep in the world's vast pool of tears. Somber was the only kind of tune for a place like this. When we got onto the lower deck, the music stopped. The sudden disappearance of the music and the rushing return of your breathing nearly made the latter quit as well. Where had it gone? We were still trying to determine where it was coming from, for God's sake. It wasn't fair that we didn't even have time to discover that before it left. I glanced at Will, who shone his beam of light around the deck. Nothing was visible in here until the beam found it. His scans caught nothing but shadows and schools of small fish. No Jamaican crab conducting a sea creature band or anything incredible like that. Just the leftover remains of a slowly decaying wreck. Will nodded at the ballroom and swam toward it. 2 ornate, windowed French doors opened into an ample entertaining space. There were some tables and chairs in there, but from our vantage point, that's all that we could see through the glass. As we neared the doors, the music started again. Not the somber, wistful tune from earlier. This was aggressive, angry, a warning, a snake's rattle set to strings. I paused and gently touched Will's shoulder to stop him. I pointed at the room, made an okay sign, and started shaking. My streetwise gut told my book-smart brain that something in there didn't want us intruding. If I could have spoken with Will, I would have been able to plead my case better than just flapping my hands around. Since I couldn't and nothing looked out of place, Will disagreed. He nodded at the room and gave me an okay sign. He wanted to keep going. I shook my head no and gave a thumbs up. Let's go back topside and discuss. Will disagreed. He pointed at me and then raised his thumb before pointing at himself and pointing toward the room. The message was clear. He was going in, with or without me. I sighed, pointed at myself and then at the room. I'd go in with him. I'm not afraid to admit that I was scared, but I was more terrified of leaving a friend alone in the dark of a man-made cave 60 meters deep. He sensed I was apprehensive and reached out to pat my shoulder. I got you. Sometimes when you muck around in the remains of the dead, the slightest touch of humanity keeps you stable. The violin concert had gotten louder. I was sure even Paul could hear this from the main deck stairwell. The aggression of it was so pronounced that it even gave Will pause. The violins had reached a fever pitch that reminded me of the moment in Psycho when Norman Bates ripped away the shower curtain. Will opened the door to the ballroom, and the music stopped. He flashed his light in there, but we didn't see anyone, just the stillness of a lifeless ship. Will pushed the door all the way open and floated into the room. I hesitantly followed behind him. Outside the beam of light, it was pitch black. Like can't see your hand in front of your face black. You could see where the light died out, just stopped cold. Speaking of temperature, that room was notably colder than the other sections of the boat. With a wetsuit on, you can block out the chill of the water, but that wasn't happening. It seeped into my bones, my soul. Will passed the light toward the back corner of the ballroom, discovering 4 large barrels stacked in the corner. 2 had fallen over, but they were all sealed. The central standing barrel had the phrase, "A summer song," stenciled across the front. That was the prize. From where we stood, it was in good condition. The client would be able to claim his multi-million-dollar prize without batting an eye. We floated over to them. The light beam bounced a bit as we kicked our way over, but the barrels stayed in the light the entire time. We were about 3 feet from them when I halted. I reached out and grabbed Will, nearly flipping him over. Between the 2 standing barrels was a pale face peeking out at us. I pointed, but Will didn't see it. I increased the urgency of my thrusting finger, but by the time that he located the spot that I had seen the face, it was gone. Behind us, a loud thump echoed throughout the room. The ballroom doors had closed. The sickening sound of a lock latching echoed through the ballroom. When you're this deep and something unusual happens, you can't panic. Despite how terrifying it might be, you can't afford to freak out. Taking huge breaths can cause lung damage or worse, deplete your air sooner than you wanted. If you panic and waste body energy, you're hurting your chances of having the kick you need to swim to safety. If you ascend too quickly, you get the bends, putting you and anybody you're diving with at risk. You cannot panic. But once you become trapped in a room darker than a Nazi's heart with a ghost hell-bent on terrifying you, not panicking requires the kind of concentration usually reserved for chess, grandmasters, and bomb squad members. I found my breathing quickened, and I did my best to center myself. I had been in hairy situations before, but this was rocketing up my list of bad times at record speed. Will turned the beam over to the door. As the beam hit the glass, a ghostly figure shuffled past the door. As fast as they were there, they disappeared. Will didn't hesitate. He swam back over to the ballroom door and tried to pull it open. It wouldn't budge. If the man was panicking, he didn't show it. I, however, was huffing air as if I'd never run out. My heart raced like a clipper ship, and every time I tried to relax, that haunted face appeared in my mind, pulling me back into panic's wake. I had been on hundreds of dives, but was acting like a scared honeymooner exploring a local reef. I swam over to Will and I grabbed the other door. He held up 3 fingers, and after the final one dropped, we both yanked. Again, no movement, not even an inch. I thought back to the blueprints but couldn't recall if there was another exit. The French doors were the only way in and out. Will looked into my eyes and patted my shoulder. He couldn't say anything, but I could hear his voice all the same. "Relax, kid, we've got this." It had the desired effect. My breathing slowed. Will shone the light into the other corners of the room, searching for another way out. I banged my fist against the doors. The thumps ricocheted through the boat. I hoped that Paul could hear it and come investigate. He wasn't supposed to leave his location, but Paul played fast and loose with the rules. I prayed he'd be willing to break them right now. Will explored the ballroom as I floated near the doors. I was alone in the dark with only my worst thoughts keeping me company. I couldn't shake the feeling that somebody was watching us. The beam hit me and I turned to Will. He had found something near the barrels and waved me over. As he did, the invisible violin played one long, uninterrupted note. It was so loud, and the fiddler was absolutely inside this room. A chill ran through my body. I wanted to get out of the water as soon as possible. My shoulders stiffened, and the sensation that someone was behind me flooded into my brain. Before I could turn around to check, something grabbed my oxygen tank and yanked me down. I hit the floor and the violin ceased. My flailing made Will swim back to me. I pulled myself back up as he got there, but he could see the fear in my eyes. I tried to relay what happened, and thankfully he got the gist of it. He shone his light behind me, and we both spotted a loose wire floating like an eel snaking through the waves. I smiled and relief washed over me. I must have gotten my tank caught on it. Will lowered the light back to the floor and found a woman's high heel. The red bottom was there by design, but in my haze, I swear that it was bloody. And before we could speculate about the shoe, a loud thud echoed behind us, followed by an ear-splitting screech as the hull of the boat ground against the rocks and dragged against the ground. While the thud before the movement was loud, it came from this room. There was no way that caused the boat to shift. The force needed to shift a yacht as monumental. Unless the barrel was full of nitroglycerin, it wasn't the cause. One more theory came to mind and filled me with terror. What if the Allegro had landed in a more precarious spot than we first thought? The blackness of the trench came to me and I shuddered. Were we inching toward a crevice? Will's light found the source of the initial thud. A third barrel had fallen, sending the other two rolling into the wall. I couldn't tell you what had caused it to move, but it did. To say that I was concerned about what was shoving heavy-ass barrels around in the dark would be a wild understatement. Another thud near us, this time by the doors. Will spun and flashed his light. Another face greeted us. Paul. Good unsubordinate Paul. He had heard my knocking and came down to us. Through an elaborate game of charades, we conveyed the door was stuck. Paul grabbed the handle and yanked the door hard. The door opened easily, so much so that Paul nearly drifted off into the darkness from the force of his pull. We swam out and gathered Paul. Will gave him a thumbs up and there wasn't an argument. We started our ascent, leaving all of the madness behind us. We moved through the main deck without incident. As soon as we got to the sun deck though, I glanced down at my oxygen gauge. It was almost empty. It shouldn't have been. The tank was full when we left, and I know that we had more than enough to do the entire task without changing tanks. There had been no telltale bubbles from a leak. It was as if the air had just disappeared. I glanced up and barely saw the underside of the bottom feeder above us. It'd be a decent swim, but I believed I could do it with what I had left in my tank. If not, I could share with Will and Paul until we breached the top. It wasn't ideal, but the other option was death. I had to try. I tapped Will on his shoulder, made an okay sign near my tank and shook. Will nodded and relayed the information to Paul. We picked up our pace. When you're running low on breathable air, you don't really want to mess around, but our situation constrained us. Move too fast to get the bends. Move too slow, die from asphyxiation. A real damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario. We broke through to the sun deck and kept going up, Will leading the way, followed by Paul and me trailing behind. I was just about to break free from the ship when my foot snagged on something. Initially thinking that it was a loose wire from the wreck, I tried to quick it away, but then I felt the grip tighten. I glanced down and my blood damn near froze. The ghostly white hand wrapped itself around my ankle. Panic finally found me. My scream was muffled and garbled through my regulator. I tried kicking away, but the hand wouldn't let go. I readjusted to get a better look, but when I saw it, my brain went fuzzy. There wasn't a body attached to the hand. I mashed my heel against the fingers. They let go, but my flipper dislodged and floated back down to the deck. I could ascend again, but my body wasn't kicking into gear. My struggle caught Will and Paul's attention, and they came down to help me. They could see the fear in my eyes. And then my tank went empty. My speed, already limited, was now hindered by the lack of a flipper. I turned my eyes skyward toward the underside of my salvation. Without a second thought, Will removed his regulator and gave it to me. I took a few breaths and I handed it back. We buddy breathed as we ascended to the bottom of the boat. My joints burned and the edges of my vision went black. The last thing I remember is seeing Cappy's waiting hands reaching for us. I woke up to the crew murmuring around me, caught the conversation in snippets. Will was confused. He didn't want to say that I had freaked out and that was the reason we were back up empty-handed, but he was tap dancing near that sentiment. "Is everyone okay?" I asked, my eyes fluttering open in the bright sunlight. "Jesus, kid, you alright?" Will asked. "What happened down there?" Cappy asked. "What happened to your tank?" "I don't know," I said, shielding my eyes from the sun. "It was full when we left. I double-checked it." "Yeah, I can back that up," Will said. "I checked beforehand, too. They were full. No indication of a leak either. We would have spotted it as soon as we got into the drink." "So how did it empty?" Maybe a broken gauge," Paul offered. "Shows fuller than it was." These are older tanks," Cappy said. "But what closed the door? What caused the boat to move?" "Currents," Will said, though he formed it more like a question. "A change in water pressure." "And then what caused the violin music?" I asked. Cappy turned to me confused. "Violin music?" "Well, you told him about the music, didn't you? And the person in the ballroom. You told him, right?" Will looked away. His face remained stoic, but his brain was trying to break the news to me that he had no idea what I was talking about. I didn't give him a chance. There was someone in the ballroom. A person." "What the hell?" Paul asked. "Yeah, they grabbed my leg as we left the sun deck," I said. "But it was just a hand." "Wait, a hand?" Cappy asked, not waiting for my response. He turned to Paul and Will. "You two see anything?" Uncomfortable silence followed. Paul finally broke it. "I was more concerned with him not dying." I didn't see anything either," Will said. "Sorry, kid." My head was already dizzy from the dive, but this kicked it into another gear. It felt dislodged from my body, floating above me. I finally found my voice. "I know what I saw, but come on, we all heard the music, right?" Will looked away again. "Will, come on, you know what you heard, we all did." "I didn't hear shit," Paul said. "Yeah, you weren't in the ballroom," I quickly countered. "I didn't hear anything either, kid." My stomach dropped. I shook my head, hoping an answer would come tumbling out, something to make them believe what had happened, but nothing emerged. Cappy let his heavy hand find my shoulder. "Son, is it possible that you were narking?" "No," I said, pushing his hand off my shoulder and standing. My balance was still off, and so I stumbled, but I was so angry that I wasn't going to let that stumble stop me. "We heard violin music. I saw a person. Whatever's down there doesn't want us there." "Kid, you know how that sounds, right?" Will asked. Paul said what they were all thinking. "Sounds like you were narking, man." I ignored him. "Cappy, who played the violin? The man or his wife?" Cappy paused. "Well, the wife. But why would that matter?" A lightning shot through my nervous system. I was onto something. "What did the rich guy tell you, Cappy? Like, what exactly did he say?" "I told you. He was going through a divorce and wanted to hide his valuable items from his ex. Secured them, dropped the boat, and hired us to retrieve it. Why?" Well, if they were just divorcing, why wouldn't she have her violin? Who gives their soon-to-be ex-husband possession of a multi-million-dollar instrument? If they're divorced, she would have it. It wouldn't be here. I mean, outside of the rich guy, nobody knows we're out here, right? What are you driving at? He said, lighting another cigarette. He lied to you. Cappy laughed. Why would he lie to me? He hired me to save his valuable stuff. Why would I care? He did, but I don't think he got divorced. I think he killed his wife and put her body somewhere on the boat, and that's why he sank it. What are you saying? Will asked, confused. Are you saying the ship is haunted? Paul asked. I nodded. His murdered wife is pissed off and taking it out on anybody that tries to steal her things. Silence. 10 long seconds of it. The water lapping against the side of the boat and the creaking of the swaying winch were the only sounds in the air. Finally, after a few, Cappy laughed. Oh, kid, come on now. I mean, it's a nice story, but you have no proof of. I saw her, I exploded. My anger was strengthening my weakened body. She touched me. We found a high heel down there. It was probably hers. Finding a high heel in the ballroom of a pleasure yacht is hardly proof that the owner killed his wife and hid the body on board, Will said. Hell, if we looked hard enough, we might find a whole stash of lady squirrel covers on board. Women attracted to yacht owners sleep with yacht owners. It's not rocket science, Paul added. Nobody believed me. Look, kid, Cappy started. No one's denying that the owner's a scumbag. Truthfully, you're probably right. But accusing the man of murder because you found a shoe, saying a sunken boat is haunted, can't stop a job based on these accusations. He paid half up front, and if we screw him over, he's exactly the kind of guy that'll come after us. If we don't finish this job, it could sink the company. I stood, my legs wobbly but resolve firm. If we go back in the water, something bad is gonna happen. Whatever is down there doesn't want us down there. Will and Cappy shared a look. The old man crossed to me, placed his hand on my shoulder and shook his head. And Paul and Will are going back down to finish the job. You're staying topside with me. No discussion. The decision is final. I looked past Cappy to Will and Paul. Both of them avoided eye contact, and they weren't going to vocalize it, but they agreed with Cappy's actions. I was pissed. You go back down and you'll die in there. Kid, Cappy said, his voice hard. Dude, we'll be okay, Paul said, trying to calm me down. I'm not thrilled about this either, but this is the right call. Few hours and we'll be back in port hitting on drunk moms. Paul, don't go. Enough, Cappy said, his voice rising. Will, I pleaded. Listen to Cap, he said. He's forgotten more about the ocean than we'll ever learn. I wouldn't go in it if I weren't sure that I'd be fine. There's something, I began, but a stern mug from Cappy ended any objection. I was hurt and I didn't know how to express myself then or now that I think about it. I punched the side of the bottom feeder. The pain rippled from my knuckles up to my shoulder. I went below deck to escape everyone. An hour later, after tending to both my physical and mental wounds, I moved back up to the deck. Cappy was staring down at the water. He saw me and pretended to be unconcerned. The small pile of cigarette butts at his feet told me otherwise. Any word? No, he said. They should have hooked the first barrel up to the cable by now. Maybe the barrels are heavier than they thought. Those stairs were narrow too. Hard to navigate through them. He said. You don't believe that, do you? No, I said. He sighed and dropped another cigarette butt onto the pile. He turned his gaze to me and shook his head. You good enough to go in? I swallowed. Physically, outside of my throbbing hand, I was fine. Mentally was another thing altogether. But if Will and Paul needed my help, I'd have to go. Cappy nodded at me. Get your gear and go find out what's going on. If anything, his voice caught. I'd never seen Cappy this broken up. It cut through my cynicism and hit my soul. If anything bad happened, don't be a hero. Come up and we'll call the coasties. Company be damned. And 10 minutes later, I splashed over the side of the boat and headed back down to the wreck. As soon as the Allegro came into view, my guts tensed. My breathing quickened, but I reined it back in. I was on a rescue mission this time. Lives were in the balance. I had to keep my wits about me. I reached the sun deck and the first stirrings of violin music started again. I swallowed, flipped on my flashlight, and made my way to the stairwell. With each foot I traveled, the violin music grew louder, more frantic. The tone flipped from somber to rage. When I finally got back down to the lower deck, my heart was racing. The violin bow was moving so fast across the strings that if we had been on dry land, it would have ignited. And that's when my eyes found something on the floor just outside the door. Something that shouldn't be there. Something that put an anchor in my stomach. 2 sets of scuba gear. My vision went blurry. I shook my head, hoping maybe I was narking and seeing something, but the gear was still there. The odds of them being alive down here were slim to none. If I pushed into that room, I'd find their bodies. A shrill shriek found my ears as the Allegro rocked back and forth again against the ocean floor. On the decks above me, loose items tipped over and landed with a dull thud that reverberated throughout the hull. The violin music stopped. As it did, something came pinging down the stairs. I spun around and flashed my light into the stairwell. A single red-bottomed high heel floated down. The unmistakable noise that had annoyed me for years found my ears. Paul's droning harmonica. I floated to the ballroom doors, peering through the glass. I nearly went blind as the entire room suddenly lit up in bright white light. I slammed my eyes shut. I could still see little white stars on the insides of my eyelids. The boat shifted again, metal grinding against the bedrock. I opened my eyes to a beautiful woman standing in the middle of the now illuminated ballroom, a violin tucked under her chin, a bow at the ready. She dragged it across the strings, but instead of violin tones, it emitted discordant, shrill harmonica notes. She locked eyes with me and grinned. The lights flickered off. When they came back on, she was gone. In her place were Will and Paul, stripped naked with their broken bodies in a heap and just like their gear had been. The lights flickered again and they were gone. The ballroom was empty now. I scanned the room for anyone, but I didn't see a soul. I noticed the barrels. The 4 had been ripped open and their contents scattered along the floor. Some photos and papers floated in the water. Any value gone. The lights flickered again. A 5th barrel stood alone in the middle of the room with the word toxic stenciled across it. The lid exploded off the top and landed near the ballroom doors, spinning like a coin on edge. That would have kept my attention if not for the woman rising like a cobra from the barrel. And gone was the beauty that had played the violin. In her place was the swollen, lumpy, broken body of somebody who had been in the water for weeks and crammed into a barrel with no concern other than that her body fit below the lid. And globs of jellied flesh broke from her face and hovered near her head. Saturn's rings, if they were made from discarded body parts. She smiled and her jaw fell off. She raised the Stradivarius up to her jawless head and played. As she moved her bloated body, more bits of her broke away. The music was reaching a fevered pitch. The boat groaned again as it shifted along the seafloor. More things on the decks above me fell over. It took me a second to realize the Allegro was listing now, slightly, but it was tilting toward the trench. If it went under, I would join Will and Paul. As if I had summoned them, Paul's dead body floated past the window behind the ballroom doors. His throat had been ripped out. I could see into his stomach. He passed, and it was Will's turn to horrify me. His throat was gone too. Unlike Paul, his eyes had remained open. As he floated by the window, his head jerked toward me and he mouthed the word, "Leave." That was enough to get me moving. I turned and kicked with all my might. As I hit the stairwell, the ship moved again. I wasn't sure how much time I had before this thing went rolling into the trench. An explosion erupted behind me and I turned in time to see the ballroom doors blow off their hinges. The disintegrating woman came out, playing her fiddle with reckless abandon, mucking up the water with her putrefying parts. She turned her attention toward me and followed me toward the stairwell. I focused all my energy on swimming up the stairs. I passed the main deck in a hurry, the violin directly behind me. My muscles burned and my lungs ached, but I kept pushing my body. I hit the sun deck, and that's when the ground beneath the boat cracked away, and the ship tumbled deeper into the water. The suction pulled on me. I kicked my legs until my joints were molten lava. I put every last ounce of strength into breaking away from the boat's descent. With my legs and arms screaming in pain and my oxygen dipping into dangerous levels, I broke free from the orbit. I glanced back and watched the Allegra tip over the edge and drop into the trench. The woman's now flesh-free skull stared up at me as the boat fell away. She raised her ghostly hand and let go of the violin and the bow. They flew at me at a speed I didn't think possible outside of a torpedo. The bow crashed into my mask, cracking it. I slammed my eyes shut and did my best to clear out any of the glass. The strings had sliced my face like the edge of a saber. Blood rushed out. The cold water stung the exposed nerves of my sliced skin. The pressure of the depth pushed against my eyes and I couldn't open them. I would have to swim up blind. I started kicking as hard as I could, pumping my arms like a windmill, propelling my fragile body back to the surface, to air. Every joint felt loose as I swam, like I was coming apart at the seams. My limbs tingled and went numb, but I pushed forward. My whole body was itchy. The bends were coming for me. I was ascending faster than I should, but it couldn't be helped. I needed to get out of the water. Forever. Finally, mercifully, I broke the surface of the water. My energy was gone. Cappy sprang into gear and helped pull my nearly drowned carcass out of the drink. He had a million questions, and all I could barely repeat was, "It took them. Who?" The violin surfaced right near the boat. 10 million bucks floating an arm's length away, tantalizingly close. Cappy glanced at it, but I used the last bit of energy to shoot up my arms and grab him. "It's cursed. The whole thing was cursed." The violin sank back below the waves. My message finally popped to Cappy's bubble. The old man stumbled back against the gunwale. I can't read minds, but I know when a man realizes that he's made a decision that sent others to their graves. He clutched at his chest and fell against the deck with a sickening thud. He was dead. Harv finished his drink and placed the glass down to emphasize Cappy's fall. Both the bartender and I were spellbound. I had leaned so close that 2 legs of the bar stool were off the ground. "What happened after?" I asked. "Oh, called the coasties and told them that I needed help. Said we had gone out for a dive at a wreck and things went sideways. 'Cause of the bodies, there was an official investigation, but Cappy didn't keep records, and nobody ever came asking about the Allegro. I was cleared of any wrongdoing. Didn't feel that way, but that's what the official paperwork said. Last time I went into the ocean. Jesus, Harv, the bartender said, pouring another drink for the man. On the house. Much obliged, he said. He glanced at me and smiled. He traced his scar with the tip of his finger. And that, my friends, that is the weirdest goddamn thing I've ever seen out in the water. I paused before my brain coughed up a useless, "Are you okay?" Harv laughed. "No, kid, but ain't nothing that can be done about it." With one gulp, the man downed his drink and stood on unstable legs. I tried to help, but he waved me away. I didn't argue. That man had dealt with enough. Normally, you play your hands until you bust, and then you get to leave the table. Cappy, Will, and Paul all did. But me, I got lucky. I went bust and got to watch all the other sad ones lose everything for 40 more years. He looked away and shook his head. That should have been me. My luck. He nodded at the bartender, clapped me on the shoulder, and kept walking until he left the bar altogether. I turned to the bartender. You think he was telling the truth? The bartender nodded to where Harv had been sitting. Next to the $10 bill he had left as a tip was an old, beat-up harmonica. I picked it up. The name Paul was etched across the back. God damn, I said, handling the harmonica like a genuine religious artifact. God damn. Ever since I was a kid, I've been fascinated with the ocean. My mom hated it. She used to tell me all the time, if God intended for us to know about the ocean, he wouldn't have put so many obstacles between us and the bottom of it. I thought that was a bit reductionist, but when I insisted on studying biological oceanography and ocean engineering, she was as supportive as she could possibly be. College was the best time in my life. I loved my studies. My mom and I even bonded over it as she let me tell her all about what I was learning about the ocean. Even though she didn't love the field I chose, she still pitched in for my education and encouraged me to live at home until I was done. She was my biggest supporter. 2 weeks after I graduated college, my dad died. And with his death, my mom seemed to lose all of her will to live. She tried to hold on for me, but every day I could see the light slipping from her eyes a little more. She died the day after my interview for my dream job, and to this day I'm convinced she did that on purpose. She knew her time was coming and she waited so I wouldn't miss my interview. My friends always tell me that's a little morbid, but when I light candles for my mom, I can feel her spirit there with me, and I know it's true. Anyway, I got the call with the job offer a few days after her funeral, another small blessing that I knew came from her. And despite wanting to just lay down and give up on everything, I accepted the job. I was still heartbroken about losing both of my parents within a few months of each other, but the job was everything that I had dreamed and more. After a few years, I was given the opportunity to join a team that was researching previously unexplored parts of the ocean, and I got assigned to the coolest place ever, the Bermuda Triangle. I know, we all grew up hearing stories about the Bermuda Triangle, and most of them can be explained by science and weather patterns. But the stories that can't be explained by science, unfortunately, I can offer you an explanation for. Turns out my mom was right. Sometimes obstacles are there for a reason. The first few weeks of our research expedition were exciting. We had a place that we were staying in Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. But since that's still a good 640 miles from our research site, we also had a fairly nice boat that we were staying on, and the team got funds for a submarine. I won't bore you with all the scientific details of our expedition, but after about 2 months, we were granted permission to send 4 people into the Bermuda Triangle in a submarine. Our team lead decided she would select 3 people to go with her, and out of our 11-person team, we knew there would be a lot of disappointed people. She said that she would give us her decision individually to avoid the awkwardness of everyone who wasn't selected. I was a bundle of nerves for the whole week it took her to decide, but on a bright, beautiful Sunday morning, Marnie found me in my bunk and told me that I had been selected. To be honest, a part of me knew deep down that I was going to be picked. There was no way all these things would have lined up so perfectly, just for me to be left behind while somebody else went on the submarine trip. As it turns out, we would all be better off if someone else had been selected. 3 days later, we were ready to take the submarine down to the ocean floor. The people in our group were myself, Marnie, an older man named Jacob, and a guy about my age named Evan, and the 90-person crew running the submarine. We all had our hopes for what we would discover, but I think everyone was just elated to be a part of something so big. The first few days in the submarine were spent mostly getting our bearings, charting, mapping, and getting used to being so deep underwater. After that, we were able to use some pretty high-tech equipment that looked a lot like the suits that astronauts wear to actually leave the submarine. I still lay awake at night and think about what that was like. The ocean was dark and it reminded me of fog actually. The way that you can see up to a certain point before it all blurs into one meaningless color. Only instead of fog, we were in an inky darkness all the time. I could see a few feet in front of me at any given moment. The wonders of the ocean hidden behind a cold, wet, dark veil, all there for me and my team to uncover. After a couple of days of collecting samples and specimens, Jacob and I made a huge discovery. Caught between a rock and the ocean floor was a scuba suit, in a design that neither of us had ever seen before. Our suits, top-of-the-line equipment not currently available to the public, looked a lot like spacesuits. This one looked like a toddler had tried to copy what we were wearing, but lacked the ability to really do it any justice. The hands looked like mittens, almost exactly the way a small child would think to draw them. The helmet was oddly oblong and looked like a large bucket with holes cut out for the eyes and mouth. The eye and mouth holes were covered with glass, and the top of the helmet was rounded instead of flat like a bucket would be, giving it an odd misshapen appearance. The body was misshapen as well, with a barrel-like torso and uneven arms and legs. While I couldn't tell what the helmet was made from, it was clear that the body seemed to be made out of leather. The helmet and body almost seemed suctioned or glued together. There was no zipper, no buttons, no way I could see to dismantle it in order to put it on. More importantly, it was clear the suit was very old, but it showed none of the signs of damage that something like that should have after sitting at the bottom of the ocean for so long. Jacob and I glanced at each other, and then rushed toward the strange sight as if we were both thinking the same thing. We worked together to move the rock off it, then cleared the debris that had gathered around the suit, mostly fish bones and small carcasses. We did so in complete silence, but despite the lack of words, I knew that we were both beyond excited. Whatever this was, we were both on the cusp of an incredible discovery. We freed the strange-looking diver suit and carried it back to the submarine. An hour later, Jacob and I stood with the rest of the crew. Everyone hovered around the table that we had placed it on. We had debated for a while if we thought it would hold up, bringing it out of the water and into a strange atmosphere, and Marnie logically decided that we needed to resurface as quickly as possible, so we could get the suit to a temperature and moisture-controlled storage facility. She told the submarine captain, and he said that he would prepare us to resurface first thing on the following day. In the meantime, Marnie told us to work our butts off to get as much done as possible before departure. She told us that if the submarine went back down, she would probably give other people on the team the opportunity to be on the crew. That was disappointing, but I agreed that it was only fair. We put the suit in the storage room that we had reserved for samples, locked the door, and then went back to work. That night was when the first unusual thing occurred. Around 1 in the morning, I woke up to piercing shrieks and raced out of my bunk into the hallway. One of the crew members, Rodriguez I think, was kneeling on the floor, clutching his head and screaming. The captain knelt next to him, trying to talk over the sound of his screams, but all we could hear was Rodriguez repeating over and over, "The eyes, it's eyes." Nobody knew what that meant, but his fear was both palpable and contagious. The captain assured us that sometimes people struggle with being underwater for very long, and Rodriguez would get the best medical and psychiatric care possible once we got back to the surface. He insisted that we all go back to bed, and everyone complied, slinking off to our bunks like a bunch of chastised children. The first thing I did in the morning was go back to the captain and ask if Rodriguez was okay. The captain smiled in greeting and assured me that Rodriguez was a bit sick, but they were sure that he would be just fine. I thanked him, and as I was leaving, I heard him call out, "If God wanted us to explore the ocean, we would have gills." It was my mom's favorite joke. Every time I talked about the new advances in oceanic technology, she would say that to me with a smile and a pat on the arm. I turned around and stared at the captain. I said, "What was that?" He was already facing away from me and glanced back over his shoulder. Sorry, what?" I knew my face was tight, my voice reflecting my nerves. "What did you say? As I was walking away, you said something about exploring the ocean." He gave me a concerned look. "Are you okay, Dr. Williams?" I didn't say anything. I nodded, every muscle in my body feeling like a tense rubber band. Yes, I'm fine, thank you. I guess I was just lost in my thoughts." As I walked out, he muttered, "I can't have another crazy on my ship." I made my way back to the sample room, which was once again unlocked, and I joined Marnie where she stood next to the area that we had reserved just for the diving suit. Marnie had sent Evan out after Jacob and I came back to chip some pieces off the rock that had pinned the diving suit to the ocean floor, and he had also collected some bits of detritus around the area as well, like fish bones and other carcasses. I walked over and said, "Have you had a chance to crack the suit open?" Marnie smiled, knowing that I was messing around, and said, "Oh right, because I want to be the ocean version of the guy who destroyed the city of Troy. No, but there's the craziest thing." I lifted an eyebrow and Marnie went on, "I don't think there's a body in here." I looked over at the diving suit and felt a strange pang of fear shoot through me. How did it get down there then? Marnie shrugged, unbothered. Maybe it dropped off a boat or something. We might never get an answer to that, but we can do some testing on it to see when it was made and what it's made from. I scooted away from the wetsuit, the room feeling claustrophobic now. Have you had a chance to run any tests, or are you waiting until we resurface? Marnie started to answer when the door opened and a sheepish-looking crew member walked in. "Doctors, I'm sorry to bother you, but I have some bad news. We aren't going to be able to resurface today after all. We're experiencing some technical issues." Marnie and I both looked at each other, mirroring the panic on each other's faces, and in her best, stern voice she said, "Define serious issues." The crew member glanced over his shoulder as if he was waiting for somebody to step in and take over for him, and then he replied, "I'll let you have that conversation with the captain. All he told me to pass along was that we're experiencing some strange weather that's interfering with the radar, and he doesn't feel safe resurfacing until it passes. He can lower us back to the ocean floor so that you can continue your research though." Marnie sighed and passed a hand over her face, looking wary. "Yeah, tell him that would be good. And please update us at your earliest convenience." She stressed the word earliest with a look on her face that always made lab assistants duck their heads and promise to do whatever she asked. The crew member was no different, and he turned to flee quickly. Before he could escape, though, I said, "Wait, what about Rodriguez? Is he going to be okay?" The crew member went pale and said, We don't know. Captain Cameron says." He stopped and squared his shoulders back. "He'll be fine. We'll get back to the surface as soon as we're able, and in the meantime, he's fine in the med bay." I let him run out then and turned to Marnie, who had already turned her own attention back to the samples. Before I could ask her thoughts on what was happening, she started giving me instructions, and I ran over to help her with the tests. If we had to be stuck underwater, we might as well be productive. While the equipment that we had on the sub was good, it wasn't the equipment that we needed to safely test the material of the suit. And so we focused on analyzing the other specimens that we took from the site instead. As we worked, it felt like the suit was the third person in the room, watching and judging silently as we worked. And Jacob and Evan joined us at some point, and the four of us made up plans for how we would use our time until the sub could resurface. Marnie was mostly frustrated that we didn't have a timeline. She wanted to map out as much time as possible, but hesitated to do that if she didn't know how much time we had. And Jacob and I encouraged her to schedule our days as if we were going to be staying for the full 5 days that we would have had left, and promised to do all her top priority items first. With that settled, we went to the mess hall for dinner. When we got there, I noticed that there seemed to be fewer people than usual. Rodriguez was missing, obviously, but I also noticed one of the female crew members I had started bonding with was gone too. I grabbed my food and sat down across from someone that I had seen talking with her before. I smiled and said, "Hey, I'm Mara Williams, one of the researchers. Do you know where Claire Mason is?" The crew member, I thought his name was Reynolds, gave me a weird look, and then shook his head, stood, and left his half-eaten tray of food where it was. I watched Reynolds walk away, feeling equal parts confused and irritated. A few minutes later, Marnie walked over and grabbed my arm. In a harsh whisper, she said, "You need to come with me." I stepped out into the hallway, feeling anxiety wringing my stomach like a dish rag. Marnie didn't say anything, but we walked down the hall until we had reached the sick bay. Once we got there, Captain Cameron stepped out with a concerned look on his face. I had last spoken with him that morning, and in that time it was as if he had aged 20 years. He waited for us to step inside, and then shut the door and said in a hushed voice, "Thank you both for coming. I'm sorry to be treating this so clandestine, but I have some concerns. I think you'll understand." He took a deep breath before continuing. "We seem to be having problems with psychosis on board. We both saw what happened with Rodriguez. In the last 24 hours, we've had 2 more crew members experience the same thing. That may not sound like a lot, but when you're on a machine like this one, you need every person to be in the best health possible." I stepped aside and we saw Rodriguez, Claire, and another crew member I thought was named Anderson, all laying in their beds. They were asleep, and they looked to be peaceful. Cameron continued, "They're sedated. Every time they wake up, they start screaming again, and we want to keep this quiet from as many people as possible. I told the crew that there's a bout of mono going around and to be cautious and stay out of the sickbay. It's not a good solution, but it's what we have right now. I need you two to see if you can figure out what's actually going on." Marnie lifted an eyebrow and put one hand on her hip. "We're not equipped for that, Captain. Neither of us have a degree in medicine or psychology. Don't you have a doctor on board?" Captain Cameron gave her a look that I can only describe as pure desperation. Our medic isn't equipped for this either, and we don't have a psychologist for this expedition because it was supposed to be a short one. Please, just do blood tests or something. Work with our medic and use any of his equipment that you need to. Figure out what's going on. Captain Cameron left, and I turned to Marnie and said, "This all started the night after we found the diving suit. Do you think we brought some kind of bacteria into the ship that's making people sick?" Marnie winced. "I hope not, but maybe we did. I'll go take a sample from it to see if there's anything weird. You go finish your dinner." She started to leave and then stopped. "And Mara, don't speak a word of this to anyone. We want to keep this quiet." I sulked back to the mess hall, feeling like my trip of a lifetime was slowly blossoming into a nightmare. I finished my food and then went back to the sickbay to check in with Marnie. She wasn't there and the medic was back, but he hadn't seen her either. Concerned now, I went back to the storage room. Sitting on the floor in the corner of the room was Marnie, tears flooding her cheeks, her eyes looking hollow and glassy. I ran to her side. Marnie, are you okay? What's going on?" She didn't speak, didn't move, just sat there like a shell of a person. I ran from the room to the sickbay and told the medic what was going on, and then I went to the control room to look for the captain. When I told him what happened to Marnie and what our suspicions were, his face grew hard. He said, "Lock the room you've got that thing in and don't let anybody touch it. If one more person gets sick, I'm making you and your team get rid of it, and I'll make you bleach the entire storage room to make sure that no one else gets sick." I apologized for all the trouble, agreed to his conditions, and left to update Evan and Jacob. I know that Marnie told me not to, but with her out of commission, I needed as much support from the rest of our team as possible. When I got to the men's bunk area, Evan and Jacob were both there looking tense. They motioned me inside and we huddled together on Jacob's bed. Jacob leaned in and whispered, "About 20 minutes after you and Marnie left, we heard more screaming. Rugen this time. He was in the hallway and near the storage room clutching his eyes and Jacob hesitated as if he wasn't sure how to explain it. He was begging for forgiveness. I don't know about what or to whom, but he kept saying, 'I didn't mean to, I'm sorry,' over and over." Evan took in a shaky breath and said, "We tried to help, but the person you were sitting with before Marnie grabbed you, I think his name is Reynolds. He pushed us away and told us not to say anything." My mind reeled. It seemed like something about the suit really was making people sick. Maybe Rugen had gone into the storage room for some reason. Or maybe an even worse thought. The bacteria on the suit that was causing this had migrated from the storage room somehow. An image popped into my head of invisible bacteria crawling along the floor, lit by a black light showing it moving in waves towards new victims. I looked up at my two teammates and said, "Cameron, Marnie, and I think the diving suit we found might have something to do with all of this. Like maybe there's some kind of bacteria on it that's causing all this. And with Marnie in the sickbay now too, I think we may be right." We all stared at each other for a long time before Jacob said, "Oh, this is bad." Evan and I nodded our agreement, and then Evan asked, "Well now, what do we do? We can't get rid of the suit. Who knows what kind of discoveries we can make with it?" And he cast his face down. "And this discovery could put all of our names on the map, you know. We could be something." And Jacob put a fatherly hand on Evan's arm. "Safety's far more important, Evan. Don't sacrifice lives to have your name on a plaque in some museum." He turned back to me and said, "I think we need to put the diving suit back in the ocean, Mara. Some things weren't meant to be found." I looked back and forth between Evan and Jacob, feeling the weight of being the tiebreaker resting on me like an anchor. Finally, I made the worst mistake of my life. I said, "I think we should try to stop whatever this is before we put the diving suit back. We came all this way and I think it's what Marnie would have wanted." I could tell that Jacob wanted to argue with me more, but when I mentioned Marnie, he closed his mouth and lowered his eyes. We agreed to meet in the storage room in an hour to try and find a way to keep the suit quarantined so that nobody else would get sick. The running theory was that some kind of bacteria was causing encephalitis, a swelling in the brain that was causing hallucinations and catatonia. We didn't have the right tools on board to properly diagnose them, but it was a good place to start. The three of us split up to look for supplies that might help. Evan left to look for cleaning supplies. I went to the med bay to get masks and gloves. And Jacob simply said that he had an idea and he ran off on his own. We had agreed to meet up outside the men's quarters again, which were thankfully on the other side of the building from the storage room. A little after 9, I rejoined Jacob in the hallway. When he saw me, he sighed and said, "Oh, I knew it. I have a bad feeling." I lifted an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" He gestured around us vaguely. "Evan isn't here. I haven't seen him since we parted ways, and finding cleaning supplies shouldn't take very long." I shook my head and handed him the gloves and mask. "Throw these on and let's go check." Jacob sighed again. I had hoped to stay away from that area until we can deal with this, but all right, let's go. We walked to the storage room together, and when we got there, Jacob pulled me gently away from the door so that he could enter first. When we walked in, neither of us were surprised to see Evan laying on the floor, hands over his head, sobbing. And Jacob and I walked over and dragged Evan to his feet and carried him to the sick bay. When we got there, we found a horrible sight. Somehow in the last hour, 10 more crew members had gotten sick. We had started with a smaller crew around 90 members, 30 people per shift, 3 shifts if I remembered correctly. Since we were a smaller submarine, we didn't need as many people. We were now down to 15 people, including Marnie and Evan. We were quickly turning into a skeleton crew, and while I didn't know very much about submarines, I had a feeling that was really bad. After we dropped Evan off, Jacob and I went to find Captain Cameron. We opened the sick bay door, and before I could process what I was seeing, Jacob had pushed me to the floor and slammed the door shut. Walking down the hallway was the diving suit. It slumped and lurched as though only one part of it at a time was able to hold itself up. We watched through the port window in the door as a crew member came around the corner and ran into the diving suit. The man smirked as though he thought somebody was playing a prank on him and looked into the eyes of the mask. His face fell, his eyes widened, and he began sobbing. I tried. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to let her drown. I was only a kid." He continued to sob, curling up into a ball on the floor as the diving suit continued to move. Jacob pulled me away from the window and placed his back to the door blocking the port. We stared at each other in silence for a long time before he said, "Okay, this is bad, and it's hard to believe." I nodded, feeling panic wrapping its cold, clammy hands around my throat. "What's happening? Is somebody in the suit?" Jacob took slow, steady breaths, and I did my best to copy him. After a few minutes, he said, I don't think so. I don't know. I don't think we can explain this." He turned and looked out the window again and took a deep breath. "We need to get back to the men's bunk. I grabbed our wetsuits, and I think that we're gonna need them." I was able to manage a small smile, and Jacob was a good person to have on my team. We made our way out of the med bay, both of us shielding our eyes with our hands to avoid looking directly at the eyes of the suit. As much as I wanted to believe there was some logical answer, it seemed like people were having breakdowns only after looking into its eyes. We moved slowly, taking small, careful steps as we walked down the hallway. We could hear more screams echoing around the ship. They seemed to be coming from the other side of the ship, which was good, but it wouldn't be hard for the creature to catch up with us. We finally got to the bunk room and Jacob threw the door open, both of us barreling inside quickly, and we collapsed to the floor in a relieved heap. Jacob was breathing heavily, his face red, and I was worried that he might have a heart attack. I found a bottle of water and I passed it to him, and then I waited for him to recover. Finally, his breathing steadied, and he nodded to me gratefully, and then pointed across the room to where 3 diving suits sat on his bunk. I rushed forward and grabbed his first and then got my own and put it on. Once we were both fully suited up, I turned to Jacob and asked, "What now?" He gave me a stern look and said, "We have to get that thing off the ship. It's too risky to try and contain it." I felt the words like a deep blow and hung my head with shame. "Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry." Jacob put his hand on my shoulder and gave me a tight smile. "We're gonna make this right. Don't worry about it too much." We both put our helmets on and stepped into the hallway. Jacob carried the body of the 3rd diving suit. I carried the helmet and we made our way towards the control room, hoping that Captain Cameron would still be in there. The plan was to find the captain and get the word out around the ship that the thing could only hurt you if you looked into its eyes. We still weren't entirely sure what happened if you looked at it, but what we had seen so far was disturbing enough that neither of us wanted to try. I followed Jacob through the ship as he led us away from the screams, taking a more circular route to the control room as we avoided the shambling creature. When we arrived at the control room, Captain Cameron beckoned us in with a relieved look on his face. There were 11 crew members crammed into the small control room, and once we joined them, we were officially at capacity. We handed Captain Cameron the diving suit and explained the plan. He nodded, looking grim, and then said, "Oh, that's better than risking anyone else's safety. How about I lead the creature towards the exit hatch as a distraction? You two just get over there safely and wait. Novak will watch the cameras in there and release the hatch once you 3 and the creature are safely inside." He gave us a pitying look. "I wish I didn't have to put you two in so much danger, but I don't see any other option." Jacob and I both nodded resolutely, and I said, "It was my decision to bring this thing on board. I want to do what I can to make it right." Jacob put his hand on my shoulder and said, "And I was involved with that decision too, and I second this one. Let's fix our mistake." Captain Cameron nodded, slipped into his diving suit, and the 3 of us stepped into the hallway. Jacob pointed to the right and then at Captain Cameron and nodded, and then pointed to the left and gestured for me to follow him. We made our way down the hall towards the exit hatch. It was a sealed, pressure-controlled room that we could use to come and go for specimen collections. It was also exactly big enough to hold me, Jacob, and the creature. The few crew members we passed, we warned about what was happening, and told them to hide somewhere safe and keep their heads down. I was starting to get nervous about the number of people that we had sedated in the medbay now. I don't know exactly how many people it takes to run a submarine, but with people dropping like flies, we had to be down to the wire. It wasn't long before we could hear scraping and shuffling coming down the hallway towards us. Captain Cameron rounded the corner, walking backwards with his head down. I glanced at Jacob and realized that if the thing pursued Cameron instead of us, we would never be able to get rid of it. I stepped away from the doorway and put myself between the creature and Captain Cameron. It didn't break stride, but when Cameron shuffled off to the side, it didn't change course to pursue him. I took over walking backwards until I made my way into the isolation room. It shambled after me but didn't stop when I put my back against the wall. It kept moving towards me until it had me pinned against the exit hatch. I kept my eyes down but called out in a shrill voice laced with panic, "Jacob, it's got me pinned." Just as I finished speaking, I felt a hard slam and I glanced up just enough to see the creature reeling back before slamming its head into my helmet again. I watched in terror as a small spider web appeared in the glass. The creature put its hands on either side of the helmet to hold me in place, just as Jacob was able to open the hatch behind us. Water rushed in and the creature was sucked out into the inky blackness. I had been able to get a good look at its hands before it was sucked out, and my stomach sank with dread. I was almost certain that the suit was stitched from human skin. Even with that fresh panic, I was thrilled, and gravity and physics took care of the problem for us. And then a leathery hand reached back inside, wrapped itself around my ankle and yanked me into the cold, dark ocean. And despite our depth, I could tell the storm was raging above us. The water would briefly light up with a lightning flash, revealing the tide, battering everything in its path on the surface. I could only see the creature when the lightning would flash, but I could tell that it was trying to get back to the submarine with me in tow. I fought and kicked, trying to get away, but the grip that it had on me was inhuman, making all my struggles to get away seem meaningless. I was about to give up hope when I saw something come down in the creature's hand. Jacob had found a large rock and brought it down on the wrist part of the suit. It weakened the thing's grip just enough for me to get away, and I crawled backwards. In the momentary flashes of light, I could see Jacob fighting to get away, and I began searching for a rock too. I could see the spider web in my helmet growing, and I knew it wouldn't be very long before the pressure would break through and drown me. I found a medium-sized rock and I fought against the water pressure to lift it. At some point, Jacob got free from the creature and helped me lift the rock, and together we carried it to where the creature was pinned by the rocks that Jacob had been able to grab, struggling to free itself. We dropped the rock on its sternum as the lightning flashed, illuminating the thing's eyes just as I looked at them. Instantly, I was transported somewhere else. It was a sunny day in November, unusually warm and bright as I walked down a hospital hallway. I was moving slowly, even though the nurses had called to tell me to hurry. I had been scared. I knew my mom was close and I wasn't ready to say goodbye. I think part of me hoped that if I never got to the room, I would never have to see her die. In a sense, I was right. I didn't have to watch her die, because she had already passed when I got to the room. The nurse said if I had only been 1 minute earlier, I might have been able to say goodbye. In the memory, I sank to my knees in the doorway of my mom's room and began weeping. I felt a hand on my shoulder and I turned around, expecting to see a doctor, but instead I found myself looking right into the face of the diving suit. When we made eye contact, I was plunged again into a memory. This time, I found myself kneeling at my dad's graveside as my mom sobbed beside me. It was the moment that I had known I would lose my mom as well, one of the most painful days of my life. Again, I felt a hand on my shoulder, but this time I looked down, and I saw the human leather glove, and I closed my eyes tight. I felt the creature turn me around, could feel its face inches from mine, but I refused to open my eyes. I could feel its rage radiating out from it as the hands moved from my shoulders to my sternum and began tearing my chest cavity open, biting through the meat of my flesh and wrapping around my bones. I could feel my rib cage bending and instinctively opened my eyes as I screamed. I was instantly plunged into another memory, this one from the time that I had dealt with a stalker in college. But this time I was ready. And as soon as I felt the creature's hand on my shoulder, I bolted. I ran through the hallways of my old college until it faced into the green and gray of the cemetery that my parents were buried in. I forced myself not to falter as I ran past my crying mother, the creature still shambling after me. The cemetery faded until it was replaced by the hospital, and I continued to run despite the burn in my chest and arms. I reminded myself that it was a dream, a hallucination, but the terror remained. After what felt like years, the hallway faded into black, and I woke up. When I woke up, I was in a regular hospital bed. Marnie was in the bed next to me, the curtain between us pulled back. Her face looked drawn and tired, older than I remembered. I took a moment to get my bearings, and then I pressed the call button for a nurse. The nurse, wearing light purple scrubs, walked in and lifted her eyebrows in surprise when she saw me. She said, "My God, you're awake. This is incredible. Let me get your doctor." She rushed over and did something on the computer next to me, took my vitals, and then ran from the room. She came back a few minutes later with a doctor in tow. They fussed over me for a while and gave me a little information, but I got the real story from Captain Cameron when he had arrived. Captain Cameron, or Nate as he told me to call him, told me what had happened. He said that Jacob and I had just managed to pin the creature when I had fallen to my knees and began sobbing. Jacob had carried me back to the submarine and put me in the isolation chamber. When they opened it, I was there in catatonic, but Jacob wasn't. They weren't sure exactly what had happened to him. They think that he got grabbed by the creature, or maybe it was starting to get free and he ran back to stop it. Either way, Jacob had sacrificed his life to save mine. They hadn't been able to recover him. As soon as the creature was securely trapped, the storm had calmed and what was left of the crew had taken the submarine back to the surface. It was a difficult journey. Apparently the storm had been a rough one, and on a skeleton crew it was extra hard. Apparently by the time that we had gotten the creature off the ship, a total of 41 crewmates had been affected by it. Those of us who had been affected by the creature were taken to the hospital, and according to Nate, only a few of us woke up. I was among the first group to wake up, and even now, almost 6 years later, 8 of those people are still catatonic. And I take responsibility for every single one of them. Marnie woke up eventually, and even though she said she didn't blame me for what had happened, I was still removed from her team. That's okay though. I'm not as interested in the ocean as I used to be. It turns out, the ocean hides some secrets for a reason.